What if tonight could be the first time in a long time that you fall asleep without the weight in your chest, without the tightness in your stomach, without the mind racing through all the things that could go wrong tomorrow? What if, instead of tossing and turning, you found yourself drifting into sleep with peace in your heart and stillness in your mind? Let's be honest. How many nights have you spent lying awake, thoughts spiraling, body tense, and nothing you do seems to calm it down? Anxiety doesn't knock. It sneaks in quietly, and before you know it, your breath gets shallow, your thoughts feel loud, and even sleep becomes a battle. But tonight, that changes. Tonight, you're not going to fight your mind. You're going to gently teach it how to rest. You're going to learn Buddhist teachings, not just as quotes or ideas, but as powerful tools to calm your nervous system, quiet your thoughts, and help you feel safe again. These aren't tricks. These are ancient, proven ways to return to peace. So get comfortable. Turn down the lights. Let your body sink into the bed. Because what you're about to experience isn't just another bedtime video. It's a path back to calm. Before we begin, I want you to tell yourself something. Say it in your heart or write it in the comments. Starting tonight, I choose peace. I am ready to rest. You're not just saying words. You're sending a message to your entire system. It's safe to let go now. So take a breath, let it be deep, let it be kind, and let's begin. So now that you've told your body it's time to rest, and you've given your mind permission to slow down, we begin the journey inward, the journey back to yourself, not to fix anything, not to fight what's happening, but to finally sit beside the anxiety instead of trying to chase it out of the room. Tonight, we begin with one of the most powerful Buddhist practices for calming the storm, not by controlling the wind, but by wrapping yourself in the blanket of awareness. There are thoughts that don't knock before entering. They barge in, loud, insistent, dressed in the voice of fear or guilt, or that one person who made you feel small. The thoughts don't ask what time it is, or if you're okay, or if you're ready to talk. They just arrive. And for most of us, the first reaction is to push them away, to fix, to distract, to argue, to silence. But what if you didn't? Not because you agree with them, not because they're welcome, but because you no longer need to fight them. You're allowed to sit with your discomfort without labeling it as wrong. You're allowed to hear the noise without making it louder by resisting it. This is the blanket of awareness. It doesn't change the thought. It changes the way you meet it. Instead of saying, "I hate this feeling," you learn to say, "This is what fear feels like right now." That one sentence changes the whole relationship. It doesn't feed the panic. It feeds the presence. It turns you from a victim of the mind into the observer of it. This kind of awareness is not passive. It's soft power. It's the strength that doesn't need to scream. In Buddhist teachings, awareness is not just noticing. It's noticing with kindness. That means when a thought about failure shows up, you don't tell it to leave. You sit with it the way you would with a sad friend. You don't rush it. You don't pretend it's not there. You just offer your attention without judgment. I see you. You're allowed to be here, but you don't get to drive. This is how anxiety begins to loosen. Not because it was solved, but because it was seen. The act of witnessing your thoughts, without fixing, without rejecting, is one of the rarest forms of healing. It's the opposite of what anxiety teaches you to do. Anxiety wants urgency. It wants action, decisions, conclusions. But awareness says, we're not doing that right now. Awareness doesn't argue with the thought that says something bad is going to happen. It gently replies, maybe so, but right now I'm just breathing. And the breath is where the practice begins to deepen. The breath is the anchor of the present. And the present is the only place anxiety can't fully live. That's why so many Buddhist monks return to the breath over and over again. It's not just air, it's the doorway back to now. So when the anxious thought visits, you meet it with breath, not resistance. Inhale, acknowledge, exhale, release. Not to force the thought to leave, but to teach the body that it's okay to stay. Anxiety is always trying to move you forward in time, into the future, into what-if scenarios, into everything that could go wrong. But awareness says, we're not going anywhere. We're staying here, and here we are safe. And this practice can happen anywhere. You don't need a candle, a mantra, or a special room. You just need attention. If you're in bed right now, and your chest is tight, and your thoughts are spinning, just start by placing one hand over your heart. Not to stop the feeling, just to stay with it. Notice the thought. Label it gently. Worry. Doubt. Fear. Then breathe. Don't try to change the story, just stay with it. Like watching clouds pass across the sky. You don't chase the clouds, you don't explain them, you don't yell at them, you let them be clouds. This is awareness. And here's the most surprising part. Awareness doesn't mean agreement. You can see a thought clearly and still decide not to believe it. Just like you can watch a movie and not confuse it with real life. Awareness says, I'm watching this. I'm not inside of it. This separation, this sacred distance, is where healing happens. It's not about having no thoughts. It's about being free from the grip of the ones that hurt you. And over time, with practice, you begin to recognize the characters in your mind. That voice that always says you're behind. That voice that tells you you're not enough. That voice that pretends to be concerned, but is really just anxious. You start to know them, and the more you know them, the less power they have. There's an old teaching in Buddhism that says, when the mind is turbulent, be still. When the mind is still, know that it is enough. That's what awareness does. It teaches you to stop chasing a different state. It tells you, you are not broken, you are aware, and that is enough. But let's go even deeper. What about the thoughts that scare you the most? The ones you don't want to say out loud? The ones that make you feel ashamed or defective? Can awareness help with those? Yes, especially those. Those are the thoughts that need the blanket most, because they're the ones you've been hiding from for years. When they rise, the natural instinct is to shove them down, distract, scroll, eat, drink, run. But awareness invites you to do something radical, to stay. Not forever, not to fix, just long enough to see the truth under the fear. Maybe the truth is you're just tired. Maybe the truth is you're grieving something you never admitted. Maybe the truth is you're overwhelmed, and no one ever told you that was allowed. Awareness holds space for those truths without forcing you to solve them. It doesn't require a plan. It only requires presence. The act of staying with what is painful is the foundation of Buddhist compassion, not the kind of compassion that feels sorry for you, but the kind that says, "I will not abandon you, not even when you're anxious." That's the kind of awareness that rewires the nervous system. That's the kind of awareness that turns sleep into sanctuary. Now let's talk about the body, because anxiety doesn't live only in thoughts. It lives in muscle tension, shallow breathing, clenched jaws, furrowed brows. Awareness isn't just mental, it's physical. So scan the body, feel the forehead, the throat, the belly. Where is the anxiety hiding tonight? Don't try to relax it. Just meet it. Say hello to it. Here's the tightness. Here's the flutter in the chest. Here's the grip in the stomach. This is sacred work. This is how you show your nervous system that you're no longer going to respond with violence. You're going to respond with presence. And what's beautiful is that presence doesn't require perfection. You don't need to be calm to be aware. You don't need to be peaceful to be present. You just need to be here. This is how you begin to fall asleep without forcing it. You meet the racing thoughts with open attention. You meet the tension in the body with gentle noticing. You become the parent your inner child needed. Someone who doesn't fix the pain, but stays beside it without fear. That's the true blanket. The one no one can see, but your whole system feels. The one that says, you don't have to be okay right now. You only have to be here. And the more you practice this, the more the mind learns. It doesn't need to sound the alarm every night. It doesn't need to tell you stories to keep you alert. It begins to understand that awareness is watching. And when awareness is watching, the fear can rest. This is not a one-time technique. It's a lifestyle. It's the way of the mindful warrior. Not the one who fights dragons, but the one who doesn't flinch when the dragon arrives. Because even the dragon is allowed to stay for a while. But it doesn't own you. You are the space, not the story. You are the blanket, not the thought. And now, as your breath begins to slow, as the body begins to soften, as the eyes grow heavier and the room fades into quiet, you're not escaping. You're arriving. Arriving into awareness, arriving into stillness, arriving into the sacred truth that there is nothing wrong with you. There is only a thought passing through a mind that is learning how to heal. You don't have to hold on anymore. The blanket of awareness will hold you now. And now that the blanket of awareness has been wrapped around the noise and you've learned not to chase away the discomfort, but to stay beside it with soft presence, the next quiet truth begins to surface. Not the loud thought, not the panicked story, but something more subtle, something left behind, the weight not of what was said, but of what never got to be spoken, the unfinished sentences, the words held back, the goodbyes that were never given, the understanding that never arrived. These are not just memories, these are echoes. Tonight, we listen to the echo of the unsaid, not to relive it, but to let it go. Some wounds don't come from what happened. They come from what didn't. The apology that never came. The closure that was never offered. The conversation you rehearsed 1,000 times but never got to have. The things you needed to say but didn't. Maybe you were afraid. Maybe the moment passed. Maybe the person is gone. But the weight stayed. And it still pulls on the corners of your peace. Anxiety feeds on these echoes. Because the mind wants to finish the loop. It wants to understand. It wants to tie things up. But some stories don't get endings. Some people leave mid-sentence, and what's left is a silence that feels unfinished. The Buddhist path offers something sacred in these moments, not closure through answers, but peace through forgiveness. Forgiveness not of the other person's actions, but of the unfinishedness. Forgiveness for the wound that didn't resolve the way you needed it to. That might still ache, because your nervous system is waiting for a sentence that will never be spoken. Forgiveness for what was held in and for what was too late to say. In Buddhism, this act of inner release is not weak. It is profound strength. It's the strength to accept that not all healing comes from dialogue. Some healing must happen in solitude, not because you deserved silence, but because you're now the one who chooses how much space that silence gets to take. Letting go of the unsaid doesn't mean you erase the meaning of what you felt. It means you stop waiting for someone else to validate it. You stop holding your breath, hoping they'll see it the way you do. You let your own heart become the witness. There are conversations your nervous system has been carrying for years, arguments that happened only in your mind, goodbyes that you never gave. The body remembers all of it. That's why it tightens when that name is mentioned. That's why you get pulled into spirals when you think of that moment. But awareness has now taught you to stay. So now you can sit with the echo. You can place your hand on your heart and say, I never got to say this, and it's okay. Or, I needed to hear something that never came, and I released the need to hear it now. Not to pretend it didn't hurt, but to stop giving the pain more fuel. Because waiting for someone else to give you closure is a form of quiet self-punishment. And in the Buddhist view, suffering isn't just pain, it's pain clung to. It's the holding on that hurts more than the wound itself. So what can we do when we carry unsaid things in the heart? We give them a place to be heard, not outside, inside, through stillness, through gentle self-listening, through symbolic rituals if needed. Maybe it's writing a letter and never sending it. Maybe it's whispering the words into the night, not to fix the past, but to unburden the present. There's an old practice where monks sit in front of an empty chair and speak to the person who hurt them or left them, not with anger, but with honesty. They say the things they never got to say. They cry, they tremble, and then they bow, not to the person, but to the truth that's been revealed. And then they get up, not because it's over, but because it's no longer trapped inside them. This is forgiveness in action. It's not the kind that says, what you did is okay. It's the kind that says, I no longer give what you did the power to shape my breath, my sleep, my body. This is radical peace, not because the world gave it to you, but because you chose to plant it in your chest like a flag. You chose to be free. It's easy to think that letting go of the unsaid means forgetting. It doesn't. It means remembering without pain. It means visiting the memory without drowning in it. It means being able to say, I remember, and I still choose peace. This choice must be made again and again, because echoes don't disappear quickly. They soften over time. Each night you return to the echo and say, I hear you. I release you. Each time you stop arguing with what never happened, the volume drops. The silence becomes quieter, and sometimes the echo is your own voice, the things you didn't say to yourself, the self-compassion you withheld, the way you stayed silent when you needed your own support. You were hurting, and instead of kindness, you gave yourself judgment. You told yourself to move on, to get over it, to be strong. But tonight, that changes. Tonight, you speak to yourself like the sacred being you are. You say, "I'm sorry I didn't listen to you. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm here now." That kind of honesty is medicine. The body hears it, the mind responds, the breath deepens. Because now, finally, you are being heard. The Buddhist view of suffering is based on clinging. When we cling to what should have been said, what should have happened, we create suffering. But when we observe without clinging, the energy changes. The story loosens its grip. The silence loses its poison. An unfinished conversation can feel like a wound frozen in time. But awareness thaws it. Forgiveness melts it. Presence rewrites it. You are no longer frozen in that moment. You are here. You are breathing. You are choosing. And in this moment, you can choose to give yourself the love that was missing. You can offer the closure that no one else gave you, not by pretending the past is different, but by refusing to let it rob you of rest. Even the most painful echoes lose their sharpness when held in tenderness. Even the most haunting memories begin to fade when they are no longer resisted. And yes, there will be times the old thought returns. The echo shows up again. That's okay. You'll meet it again. This time with softness. This time without fear. It might say, "They never apologized." You'll say, "True, but I forgive myself for waiting." It might say, "You never said goodbye." You'll say, "Maybe I never will, and still I choose peace." Because peace doesn't require completion. It only requires compassion. And that's something you can offer yourself now in this breath. The body, hearing all of this, begins to rest. The heart, hearing all of this, begins to trust. The mind, having been heard, begins to settle. And so the echo becomes an exhale. The silence becomes a song. And you begin to fall not just into sleep, but into healing. Because nothing more needs to be said. Not tonight. And now that the echoes have been heard and softened, not erased, but understood without tension, the breath begins to feel different. It no longer rushes in to save or fight or plead. It settles, like a friend who finally sits down after pacing. But in this stillness, a hidden doorway appears. One that doesn't open with thoughts or words or even effort. It opens with the simplest, most overlooked gesture of all, letting go through the breath, not the inhale, not the holding, but the quiet exhale, the back door of anxiety. There's something most people miss when they try to breathe through stress. They focus on the inhale. They force deep gulps of air, trying to stuff their lungs full of calm. But Buddhist teachings point to something else, something counterintuitive and strangely powerful. The inhale is not the hero. The exhale is. Anxiety is contraction. It's the body bracing for what might come. It's the shoulders rising, the belly tightening, the breath getting trapped in the chest. The inhale often gets hijacked by panic. It becomes shallow, quick, urgent. But the exhale is different. It's voluntary. It's where control returns. It's where choice lives. So when everything feels overwhelming, when thoughts are loud and the chest is heavy, the secret isn't to try harder to calm down. It's to focus on the exit, the quiet release of air, the part of the breath cycle that says, I don't need to hold this. When you exhale with awareness, you're not just releasing air, you're sending a signal to the nervous system, to the brain, to the parts of you still bracing for attack. You're saying, it's safe now, and the body listens. It's not a metaphor, it's biology. The parasympathetic nervous system, the one responsible for rest and digestion and calm, is activated by the exhale. That means every long, slow out-breath is a direct line to peace. Not a performance, not a technique to impress anyone, just a quiet rebellion against fear. And here's what most people never get taught. The way you exhale tells your mind what kind of world it's in. If you sigh with tension, the brain hears, something's wrong. If you exhale slowly, deeply, like you're pouring yourself into the present moment, the brain hears, we're okay. This is the back door. Not because it's hidden behind complexity, but because most people overlook it. They try to fix anxiety by thinking their way out. But this isn't a problem for the head. It's a message for the body. So right now, wherever you are, whatever you feel, let the next breath in come naturally. Don't force it. Don't analyze it. Just let it arrive. Then, when it's time to exhale, let that out-breath be full. Let it be slow. Let it be like setting something down that you've carried too long. Breathe in, not to gather. Breathe out, to let go. And with every slow exhale, you're not escaping. You're returning. Back to the body. Back to this moment. Back to a place where anxiety doesn't need to be pushed out. It leaves on its own because there's nothing left for it to feed on. The Buddha once said, just as a skilled carpenter smooths a piece of wood with care, so does the meditator smooth the breath. Not rushing, not fixing, just shaping peace with patience. And the more you focus on the exhale, the more the inhale begins to follow, not as a gasp, but as a welcome. And this rhythm, this sacred tide, starts to become the background music of your healing. It doesn't matter if your thoughts are still loud. That's okay. Let them run. Let them bounce around. Just keep breathing out like the wind brushing over a mountain. Soft, constant, present. You don't have to calm down. You only have to breathe out slowly. Because here's something anxiety never tells you. The exhale doesn't wait for perfect conditions. You can do it in the storm, in the middle of panic, in the middle of not knowing what to do. You don't need clarity. You need release. There's an old Zen teaching that says, the inhale belongs to the world, the exhale belongs to you. And it's true. The world demands, the world presses, the world fills. But the exhale, that's where you take your power back. And once you begin to master this rhythm, something strange and beautiful starts to happen. You stop reacting. Not because the triggers disappear, but because the breath gets there first. Before the thought explodes, before the fear grows teeth, you exhale. And in that moment, a gap opens. The reaction doesn't hook you. The panic doesn't claim you. This gap, that's where freedom lives. And the more you return to it, the more your body begins to trust you again. It stops preparing for war. It stops scanning for threats. It learns that each breath is a signal, and each exhale is a promise. We're not in danger anymore. Even if the thought says we are, even if the feeling says we are. Because the breath never lies. It doesn't need a story. It doesn't need a reason. It just flows, reminding you that peace isn't a performance. It's a practice, a return, a breath that ends with soft release. And you can make it a ritual, not a chore, a sacred gesture. Before sleep, when you wake, when the mind spirals, when the phone rings, when the silence grows heavy. Inhale lightly, exhale fully. That's it. No affirmations needed, no mantras required. The breath knows. There's even more depth if you pay attention to the pauses. That moment, right after the exhale, before the next breath comes in, that still point, that emptiness, that's not a mistake. That's a doorway. That's where the mind stops grasping just for a moment. That's where anxiety pauses, because there's nothing to hold on to, no breath, no effort, just being. The more you sit in that space, the more your nervous system learns that rest doesn't have to be earned. It's available, right here, in this breath, in this moment, without conditions. Buddhist monks often meditate on this exact breath cycle. They don't try to stop their thoughts. They don't chase calm. They just stay with the exhale. And with each release, the illusion of control softens. The need to fix disappears. What's left is presence, pure, simple presence. And presence, when repeated enough, becomes sanctuary. Now, some people worry that if they let go too much, they'll lose control. But anxiety isn't control, it's reaction. True control is quiet. True control is choosing to breathe when everything in you wants to scream. So the practice is not passive, it's powerful. It's the moment you stop adding tension and start allowing life to move through you. Every anxious thought that shows up, let it be. Don't argue. Don't push. Just exhale. Every story that tells you something bad is coming, let it pass. Exhale again. Each time you do, you're taking a step out the back door, quietly, softly, away from the noise, toward the stillness. And if the thought comes back, let it. It's just a visitor. You don't have to open the front door, just keep walking toward the back, toward the breath, toward the place where you don't need to explain yourself, where you don't need to solve the story, where it's enough just to release. This is where anxiety begins to lose its grip. Not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in 100 small, patient exhalations, in the practice of leaving, gently, the mind's trap. You're not running away. You're walking yourself home, one breath at a time. And as the breath slows now, as your body begins to feel the weight of rest pulling it downward, you don't need to do anything more. Just let the next breath in come softly, and when it's time, let it go, completely. There is nothing more powerful than a breath that knows where it's going. Tonight, it's leading you to stillness, to the back door, to peace. The breath has led you here, out the back door of anxiety, into a quieter space where thoughts no longer pull with the same urgency. And in that space, a new kind of strength begins to rise. Not the strength of pushing or controlling or forcing anything into silence, but the kind of strength that moves softly, that meets each moment with open hands instead of clenched fists. This is where you begin to discover the soft discipline of presence, not as a task, not as pressure, but as a returning over and over again, gently, honestly, without punishment. Most people mistake presence for performance. They think being mindful means being perfectly still, always calm, always wise. But presence isn't perfection. It's permission. Permission to return again and again. No matter how many times the mind wanders, the heart tightens, or the body feels tired. It's not about staying in control. It's about being in relationship with each breath, each sensation, each thought, without needing to master it. Control is loud. It demands, it measures, it criticizes. But presence is quiet. It notices, it holds, it forgives. And that is the real discipline. There's a deep teaching in Buddhism that says, practice is not to escape life, but to meet it fully. That means even the anxious moment can be included, even the mistake, even the time you lost yourself in thought and forgot to breathe. Nothing is outside the path. The discipline is not in getting it right. It's in the willingness to come back, softly, without shame. This kind of discipline feels foreign at first, especially if you were raised in systems where success was measured by effort, where stillness was seen as laziness, or where emotion was something to suppress. But Buddhism offers another way. It says the highest form of discipline isn't force, it's fidelity. It's staying close to what's real, even when the mind wants to run. So, how do you build that? Not with punishment, not with willpower, but with practice. A returning, a choosing. This breath, this step, this moment. It starts in small ways. When the thought spirals, you don't need to win the argument. You notice. You come back. When the fear rises, you don't need to drown it out. You meet it. You stay. That's presence. That's discipline. It's not what you fight. It's what you're faithful to. And this isn't only something that happens in meditation. Presence is a living discipline. It's how you listen to yourself. It's how you respond instead of react. It's how you keep the door open to the present moment, even when it storms, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it doesn't go your way. This discipline says, I will not abandon myself. Not in confusion, not in doubt, not in fear, especially not then. And yes, it's tempting to go back to control, to try to fix, to measure, to push yourself into some version of peace. But that's not real peace. That's pressure wearing a mask. And the body knows the difference. The body doesn't soften under force. It softens under safety. Presence is that safety. You begin to retrain the nervous system not by holding tighter, but by loosening gently, by showing up with kindness when anxiety shows up with urgency, by replacing harshness with consistency. I'm here. I'm listening. I'm not going anywhere. That's the rhythm of soft discipline. In Buddhist monastic life, discipline is daily, but it's also rooted in compassion. Monks wake up early, not to prove something, but to align themselves with presence before the world pulls them away. Their rituals are reminders, not rules. Their silence is not restriction, it's reverence. You can create that same rhythm in your life, not with rigid plans, but with gentle anchors. a morning breath, a pause before speaking, a conscious sip of tea. The discipline isn't in how long you stay present. It's in how often you return. And when you do get pulled away, which you will, it's not failure, it's practice. Every return is a repetition, and every repetition makes presence more familiar. You'll notice this shift over time. What used to trigger you starts to feel less sharp. What used to spin you into stories starts to dissolve before it grabs hold. That's not control. That's presence doing its quiet work. It's how you build stability without stiffness. Because life is not something to grip, it's something to meet. Presence also asks you to listen closely, patiently, to your inner world. To catch the moments you disconnect. To feel the subtle tension of bracing. To notice when you leave yourself in thought, and instead of correcting, you simply return, again and again, without blame. And this return, it's everything. It teaches your system that you are safe to feel, safe to soften, safe to simply be as you are, without needing to improve the moment. Because presence isn't an upgrade, it's a homecoming. This doesn't mean you never change, but change born from presence is rooted in love. It's not, I'm not good enough, so I must fix this. It's, I care enough to meet this part of myself fully. That shift in intention changes everything. It allows you to meet anxious moments with open attention instead of suppression. It allows you to respond to overwhelm with gentleness instead of strategy. And it allows you to stay connected to your body when the mind pulls toward panic. Presence is also physical. It lives in posture, in how your feet meet the ground, in how your shoulders sit, in how your breath moves through the ribs. You don't have to sit cross-legged in a cave to feel it. You just need to come back to sensation. Feel your fingertips. Feel your tongue resting in the mouth. Feel the inhale, yes, but feel the exhale more. The soft fall of it. The surrender. That's presence, and it works because it's honest. It meets life where it actually is, not where you want it to be, not where you pretend it is, but here, now, this second, this breath, this heart. And maybe tonight, presence means sitting with your anxiety without needing it to stop. Maybe it means breathing with fear instead of against it. Maybe it means giving up the fantasy of perfect calm and instead practicing sacred attention. That's not failure. That's the path. Every moment you notice you've drifted and choose to return, you deepen your discipline. Every time you forgive yourself instead of judging, you build trust. Every breath you take while staying present to discomfort is a revolution against reactivity. And here's the gift. The more you do this, the more peace becomes available without effort. You don't have to search for it. You don't have to earn it. It arises naturally because you're no longer fighting the moment. You're inside it. You're not managing the moment. You're belonging to it. This is what makes soft discipline sustainable. It's not a demand, it's a devotion. And over time, presence becomes your resting state. Not because the world got easier, but because you stopped leaving yourself to chase a better moment. You began staying with what is. And that staying, soft, quiet, brave, is what transforms everything. So if your thoughts still wander, let them. If your heart still pounds, hold it. If your mind still questions, listen. But keep returning, with tenderness, with trust, with breath. Presence doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be loyal. You're not here to control this moment. You're here to meet it. And now that you are, softly, completely, there's nowhere else you need to go. Let this breath be enough. Let this presence be your peace. Let the body rest. Let the mind exhale. You've returned, again. That is more than enough. So now that you've returned, not with force, but with quiet loyalty, moment after moment, the space within has grown more stable. The air feels softer, the body less guarded. You're no longer fighting the noise or chasing calm like a prize. You've learned to stay. But what happens when staying still brings new thoughts to the surface? Thoughts you didn't invite. Thoughts that feel loud, strange, or even painful. Thoughts that seem to carry stories you don't want to hear. This next teaching helps you meet them without becoming them. Because thoughts will always come. The key is not letting them move in without a passport. There is a silent mistake most minds make. The belief that every thought must mean something about who we are. That every image, judgment, fear, or impulse has something to say about our character, our future, or our worth. But Buddhist wisdom offers a deeper truth. Thoughts are not facts, they're visitors. Some are kind, some are frantic, some are loud, some are quiet. But none of them are permanent. None of them are you. Thoughts without a passport. This is the practice of seeing thoughts arrive and decline without turning them into identity. Just because a thought crosses your mind doesn't mean it deserves your name. Just because it repeats itself doesn't mean it speaks the truth. It's simply activity. It's just weather in the sky of the mind. This realization can change your relationship with anxiety at the root. Because anxious minds are often filled with intrusive thinking, not just worries, but full stories. Something bad will happen. You're not doing enough. You'll never be safe. These thoughts don't just arise, they announce themselves like royalty, loud, demanding, urgent. But here's the shift. You can let them in without letting them stay. You can see the thought without shaking its hand. You can hear the story without acting on its urgency. You can acknowledge the fear without making it a prophecy. This kind of attention is what the Buddha called bare awareness. Awareness stripped of commentary. You see the thought not as content, but as movement, like watching a bird fly by. You don't have to follow it. You don't have to catch it. You just notice it. Then let it pass. One of the core insights in Buddhism is that clinging causes suffering. And clinging doesn't only mean attachment to pleasure or possessions, it also means attachment to thought. When a thought arises and you grab onto it, turn it over, dissect it, and build your mood around it, you've made it real. But if you see it and simply let it float by, you remain free. This doesn't mean you ignore your mind, it means you stop making it your ruler. Thoughts without a passport means you stop giving automatic permission. Just because a thought knocks doesn't mean it's allowed to move in, redecorate your sense of self, and throw a party in your identity. You get to decide who stays. You get to choose who influences your mood. An anxious thought says, "You are not safe." Bare awareness responds, "Noted." That's it. No argument, no analysis, no need to disprove. You label it gently. Fear, memory, projection. Then breathe and let it pass. This practice is not cold detachment. It's warm clarity. It's seeing that thoughts are real in experience, but not always real in meaning. They are ripples, not roots. They can feel intense and still be untrue. And when you no longer grant every thought a passport, you stop building your identity out of temporary visitors. You don't call yourself broken because a fearful thought arrived. You don't call yourself weak because you thought about giving up. You see those thoughts as clouds, not coordinates. Even helpful thoughts are temporary. Even joyful thoughts are just passing through. That's what makes the practice so steadying. You no longer chase or resist. You observe. And in observing, you stay centered. Let's look closer at how this changes anxiety specifically. An anxious mind tends to confuse thought with danger. If the mind says something bad will happen, the body reacts as if it's happening now. But if you've trained in watching thoughts without identification, you create a pause. That pause rewires everything. The thought still comes, but now it's seen, not believed. This builds inner space, the kind of space that softens the body and slows the breath, the kind of space that holds the fear without becoming it. And this space doesn't just change your relationship to anxiety, it transforms your entire sense of self. Because when thoughts stop defining you, the deeper you begins to emerge. The silent awareness beneath the thinking, the steady presence that existed before the stories. This is the part of you that never leaves, that watches with kindness, that breathes through all seasons of the mind. And the more you rest in that place, the less effort it takes to be at peace. Now, some thoughts will still insist. They'll come with force. They'll wear disguises. They'll tell you they're urgent, important, necessary. That's okay. Let them speak. Let them try. Just don't give them your keys. Some people find it helpful to give these thoughts names. Oh, there's Catastrophe Carl again, or here comes Judgment Joan. Not to mock, but to distance. To remind yourself, this isn't you. It's just activity. It's a pattern. And patterns are not prisons when they're seen clearly. Over time, this practice teaches you something radical. That freedom isn't the absence of thought. It's the refusal to be owned by thought. That your mind can still be loud and your soul can still be calm. This is where true presence lives. Not in emptiness, but in non-attachment. Not in silence, but in sovereignty. Not in controlling the mind, but in reclaiming your right to watch it with choice. This kind of clarity builds inner strength, because when thoughts no longer define you, reactions lose their grip. You stop spiraling, not because you silenced the mind, but because you stopped believing its every word. You become less impressed by drama, less startled by negativity, less reactive to fear. And that stability, it's not cold, it's deeply compassionate. Because you can now meet every thought, no matter how dark, with kindness instead of panic. You say, I see you. You don't belong to me. You're just passing through. And that changes everything. Now, this doesn't mean you never listen to your thoughts. It means you discern. You learn to sense which thoughts arise from clarity and which come from fear, which ones serve your peace and which ones steal it. And you give weight only to the ones aligned with truth. Thoughts without a passport also help with self-talk. Because when you stop identifying with every thought, You can speak to yourself with more gentleness. You can hear, "I can't handle this," and respond, "That's a thought, not a fact." You can hear, "I'm a failure," and say, "That's just an old echo. I don't need to live inside it." This is what Buddhist practice calls liberation, not from thinking itself, but from believing you are your thoughts. So tonight, as your mind continues to stir, as thoughts come and go, let this be your mantra. I am not my thoughts. I am the space they pass through. And let that space widen. Let that awareness hold you. Let the visitors knock without opening the door. Let the stories speak without letting them write your name. You are not here to silence the mind. You are here to see it clearly, with kindness, with strength, with presence. And as the night deepens, as thoughts slow, as the body finds gravity again, you stay rooted in that simple truth. No thought has permission to define you, not unless you say so. And tonight, you don't. Now that the thoughts have been seen for what they are, passing guests without the right to define your name, the space around you feels lighter. You no longer carry the burden of believing every voice inside your head. The grip of identification has loosened, and what remains is clarity. But within this clarity, something else may start to rise. Not the anxious thought, but the ache of things that ended without resolution. The silent weight of what didn't finish properly, what didn't conclude in the way you hoped. The words unsaid, the chapters left open. This next step in your path is not about fixing the ending. It's about bowing quietly, inwardly, to the truth that not everything gets wrapped in ribbon. This is the teaching of the unfinished bow. There are events in life that don't end the way we want. A friendship that dissolved without a goodbye. A moment of love that broke without warning. A dream that died slowly while the rest of the world moved on. These moments don't always come with closure. Sometimes there is no final conversation, no deep explanation, no perfect resolution. There's just silence or distance or a moment that slipped away before you were ready. And yet, the body remembers. It holds onto the gesture that never completed, the goodbye you didn't say, the forgiveness you couldn't give, the apology you never received. And that incompletion sits heavy. It hums beneath the skin. It colors how you trust, how you show up, how you rest. In Buddhist wisdom, we are taught that clinging to completion, clinging to perfect endings, is a hidden source of suffering. Because the mind wants to tie things up, it wants to understand why. It wants the story to make sense, but life doesn't always move in circles. Sometimes it ends in fragments. Sometimes the bow is never tied. But here's the deeper path. You can bow anyway, not to the person, not to the pain, but to impermanence itself, to the truth that all things change, dissolve, move on, even when we don't want them to. And in that bow, something unexpected happens. The ache starts to shift. Not because you got answers, but because you no longer need them to be whole. This inner bow is not dramatic. It happens in stillness. It happens in the breath. It happens when you stop bracing against what didn't finish and start accepting that it ended how it did. That acceptance doesn't mean you liked it. It doesn't mean it was okay. It means you stop forcing the moment to be something it never became. There's a phrase in Zen that says, "Leave no trace." It doesn't mean don't feel. It means don't carry what's already gone. The person who left, the job that ended, the phase of life that passed, they are already gone. But your mind might still be chasing them, still rewriting the final scene, still hoping for a redo. That chase is what the unfinished bow brings to rest. It invites you to lower your shoulders, to soften your gaze, to say, it ended, not perfectly, not completely, but it ended, and I'm still here. That acknowledgement is sacred. Some people never give themselves that permission. They stay caught in a loop of waiting for the call, the closure, the day they'll feel resolved. But waiting turns into another form of clinging. And clinging doesn't honor the past. It keeps you trapped in it. The unfinished bow gives you another option. It lets you hold the memory without turning it into a prison. It lets you carry the pain without letting it shape your future. You bow internally, not as defeat, but as reverence. For what was, for what couldn't be, for the messy, human, sacred truth of incompletion. And there's a quiet power in that, because when you bow, you step out of the illusion that things should have gone differently. You begin to say yes to life as it is, not as you hoped it would be. In Buddhist ritual, bowing is a gesture of humility, of presence, of surrender. It's not weakness, it's clarity. It's saying, I no longer fight this, I face it. And in that facing, something unspoken resolves. You may not get the closure from outside, but you can give it from within. This is not something that happens all at once. It may begin slowly, maybe with a sentence you whisper to yourself at night. I forgive myself for needing it to end a certain way. Maybe with a hand over your heart saying, I still don't understand, but I let go anyway. Maybe with a breath that doesn't chase the past, but returns to the now. Each time you do that, the loop in your mind loses momentum. The same old scene plays less clearly. The voice that kept asking, why, grows quieter. You realize the story is over, and your healing no longer depends on rewriting it. The unfinished bow doesn't erase the past, it gives it dignity. It says, that was real, that was important, and it ended imperfectly, but I don't need to carry that ending forever. There's a certain grief that comes with this, the grief of accepting that you'll never get the words you waited for, the message, the acknowledgement, the clean goodbye. That grief is tender, but it's also honest. It's the grief that brings peace, not because it solves the story, but because it stops demanding a new one. This grief doesn't break you, it humbles you. And in that humility, your heart learns how to stay open, even to the people who left, even to the things that broke. The bow doesn't close the book. It lets you walk away from the page. And now the question becomes, what will you do with the space that opens? Because when you stop waiting for the past to finish healing you, you free yourself to start healing in the present. You return to your breath. You return to your body. You return to the people who are still here and to the life that hasn't ended yet. And yes, some endings will still sting. Some may always carry a bit of sorrow. That's okay. Let sorrow be part of the bow. Let the ache be held. But don't let it write your future. In this way, you take the sacred middle path, not erasing what happened, not obsessing over it, but honoring it with a single gesture, the inward bow. You don't need to tell anyone. You don't need to announce your forgiveness. You just lower the fight in your body. You soften the grip in your chest. You say in your own way, I let this go unfinished. And then you live, fully, with a heart that no longer clings to the final chapter, with a mind that no longer demands perfect symmetry, with a soul that understands not all bows tie. And that's okay. Now, let your breath carry this truth deeper. With each exhale, release a little more of the moment you never got to complete. Let the tension in your shoulders melt. Let the memory stand as it is. No edits, no revision. You bow, and something within you bows back. And that is enough. And now that the unfinished bow has been offered, quiet, internal, complete only in spirit, you begin to feel the subtle space it leaves behind. A space where regret used to echo, a space where longing once clung. But in that silence, something else often rises to the surface, the memory of a mistake, the decision that unraveled everything, the turn you took that led away from what you thought your life would be. This next part of the journey is about meeting that moment, not to rewrite it, but to walk beside it until you see the gift hidden beneath the detour. Because sometimes what looked like failure was just the path, disguised. There's a weight we carry, often buried beneath our daily habits and distractions. It isn't fear, it isn't sadness. It's the belief that we messed up so badly that peace is no longer available, that a certain moment or choice or action closed the door to the life we should have had, the job we lost, the person we hurt, the risk we didn't take, or the one we did take that ended in disaster. And the pain doesn't only come from the event itself, it comes from the story that grew around it. The inner narrative that says, you ruined it. You should have known better. You had your chance. This voice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers, quiet but constant. A low-grade shame that turns the past into a life sentence. But Buddhist wisdom invites a different approach, one that doesn't bypass the pain, but walks through it with presence. It teaches that the path to peace is not built by avoiding mistakes, but by transforming them. That what matters most is not the error, but how you relate to it now. The mistake that led to now is not your prison, it's your teacher. And that teacher doesn't arrive with praise. It arrives in the form of discomfort, humility, and eventual awakening. It's the reminder that you're not here to be perfect. You're here to wake up. And sometimes waking up requires falling first. There's an old Zen story of a student who accidentally broke a valuable cup belonging to his master. Ashamed, he tried to hide it. But the master discovered the truth and smiled, saying, "Now you have learned twice, once through carelessness and once through honesty." This is the truth of real growth, that the lessons most worth learning are often the ones we resist. And when we turn toward them instead of away, they stop being mistakes. They start being directions. That doesn't mean we're glad they happened. It means we stop using them as evidence against ourselves. We stop replaying them as proof that we're unworthy, and we start letting them guide us, not as scars, but as signposts. The most powerful healing happens when you take the thing you most regret and say, "Even this has something to teach me." That's not delusion, that's wisdom. The wisdom to stop arguing with what's already done and start walking with it. And that begins with ownership. Not blame, not shame. Ownership. The quiet acknowledgement. Yes, I did that. Or yes, I didn't do what I should have. But that moment is not the end of me. It's part of my path. And I will meet it with clarity, not self-hate. This ownership isn't heavy. It's honest. And honesty clears space. Because when you no longer need to protect your image, when you no longer need to hide from what happened, your energy returns, not to fix the past, but to live fully now. The mistake that led to now can only become a gift if you let go of the belief that your worth is tied to your record, that your peace must be earned through perfection, that redemption only comes after punishment. None of that is true. Peace is available the moment you stop resisting what's real. What's real is this: you are not your worst decision. You are the one who is still breathing after it. And if you're breathing, you can begin again. This is why the breath matters so much in Buddhist practice. It reminds you, this is the moment, not the one where you messed up, not the one you keep replaying. This one, right here, right now, and from this place you can move forward with kindness, with presence, with the soft strength that comes from having fallen and risen, not once, but many times. Mistakes don't ruin paths, they reveal them, but only if you stop turning them into identity. You are not the one who failed. You are not the one who lost everything. You are the one who made a decision based on what you knew at the time. And now you know more. That knowledge is sacred. That's your wisdom. That's your ground. In Buddhist thought, even karma is not punishment. It's cause and effect. That means every action creates momentum, but nothing is fixed. Nothing is final. Your awareness of what happened becomes the beginning of what happens next. So now the question is, how will you relate to that moment? Will you let it define you? Or will you let it inform you? Because the mind loves to loop in punishment, to replay the scene, to relive the embarrassment, to imagine the alternate ending. But awareness brings you back. It says, this is not a movie, this is your life, and it's still unfolding. The moment you stop arguing with what happened is the moment you begin to walk the real path. The one that leads forward, not backward. The one where you don't need to pretend you never got lost. Because the path you're on now, it started right there. In the detour, in the confusion, in the fall. You are here because of that moment. And while it may have brought pain, it also brought insight. And insight is worth more than control. It's the root of compassion, not just for others, but for yourself. When you've seen your own mess and still choose to sit with it instead of running away, you begin to understand everyone else a little more. You stop judging so harshly. You stop needing to be right. You start seeing mistakes not as signs of weakness, but as signs of being human. This is where your growth lives. In the place you thought you ruined everything. And from here, your presence deepens, because you know what it's like to lose direction. And now, each moment of stillness feels like a miracle. Each breath feels earned. Each small act of self-kindness feels like a revolution. So let the memory come, let it speak, let it play the tape, and then say, I hear you, you were painful, but you are no longer my jailer, you are my teacher. Say it again, if you need to. Whisper it in your mind every time shame tries to tighten its grip. You are not stuck. The mistake that led to now is not the thing to overcome. It's the thing to integrate. Let it shape you, not scar you. Let it ground you, not define you. Let it humble you, not haunt you. And from this place, walk on. With a heart that knows the truth, that wisdom is not born from getting it right. It's born from staying awake, even after getting it wrong. So breathe deeply now. Let the memory rest. Let your future unfold without chains. The path is here. It's always been here, even in the wrong turn, especially there. Now that the mistake has been met without judgment and transformed into a path instead of a wound, something in you has shifted. You no longer need to be perfect to move forward. You've dropped the weight of shame. But sometimes, even with clarity, the storm still comes, not from the past, from the body, from the chest tightening in the middle of the night, from the pulse that speeds up without warning, from the cold flood of panic that arrives uninvited. This next step is not about defeating that panic. It's about the quiet rebellion that changes your entire relationship to it, not by running from it, but by refusing to obey its urgency. Panic wants speed. It wants reaction. It wants you to do something now, to solve, to escape, to tense. It arrives with sirens and flashing lights, pretending it's the most important thing in the world. And for most people, it works. They tighten, they freeze, they fight back or flee. But in Buddhist practice, a deeper approach is offered. Not louder, not stronger, just stiller. This is the rebellion, doing nothing in the face of everything, not out of apathy, out of presence. Panic thrives on obedience. It feeds on your reaction. The moment you start trying to fix it, you've already lost your center. The mind spirals, the body follows, and everything inside you believes the false emergency. But what if you stayed still? What if, instead of moving toward it or away from it, you became the calm in the middle? That's what Buddhist teachings mean by the eye of the storm. Not a metaphor for denial, a literal state of stillness while the chaos moves around you. It doesn't mean you don't feel fear. It means you don't let the fear make your decisions. You become the one who watches, not the one who runs. And that watching, that simple, clear noticing, is powerful enough to unravel the panic's spell. Because here's what panic doesn't expect: your silence, your breath slowing instead of quickening, your body staying seated when it wants to jump, your voice staying calm when the urge is to scream. This is not suppression, it's discipline, soft discipline, the kind that says, I see you, I feel you, but I will not act from you. That's the rebellion. Most people think power means control, but in Buddhism, true power is non-reactivity. The ability to witness without obeying. The ability to feel without losing your ground. And this practice begins with one simple choice. When panic comes, don't follow. You notice the heart racing, you feel the sweat, you hear the thoughts screaming, and you breathe, not to make it stop, to stay present, to anchor yourself in the only place that panic cannot reach, the now. Because panic lives in what if, in futures that don't exist yet, in predictions, in catastrophes. But the present is quiet. It's just breath, just air, just contact with the ground beneath you. And the more you stay with what's real, the more the storm loses its power. It's not easy at first. The body wants to run, the brain wants to fix. But the practice is to stay, to soften, to return, over and over again. No force, just refusal. Refusal to believe that urgency means truth. Refusal to act from fear. Refusal to become the wave instead of the shore. And slowly, something changes. The panic peaks, then it breaks, like a wave crashing on sand that doesn't move. Your body may still shake, your mind may still race, but something inside you is no longer participating. That's the freedom. It's not about feeling nothing, it's about reacting to nothing. Panic wants your participation. Don't give it. Let it perform. Let it shout. Let it predict disaster. But don't build a life around its voice. This practice grows stronger the more you do it. Each time you don't react, you send a new message to the nervous system. We're safe. We're allowed to feel this without moving. And eventually, the body learns that the panic doesn't require protection. It just needs to pass. And it will. Always. No panic lasts forever. Even the worst waves break eventually. This truth becomes your shield, not armor, just remembrance. I've seen this before. I don't need to follow. And you can apply this in any moment, during a difficult conversation, in the middle of a sleepless night, in the rush of fear before a big decision. You stay, you breathe, you let the storm do what it does, without letting it move you. That stillness isn't just survival, it's transformation. Because every time you don't react, you reclaim your life from the grip of fear. You show your nervous system that calm doesn't mean the panic is gone. It means you're not afraid of it anymore. And when you're not afraid of panic, panic loses its grip. It may still visit, but it no longer commands. It may still shake, but it no longer dictates. You stop organizing your life around fear. You stop avoiding the places, people, or situations where it might show up. Because now you know how to meet it. Not with war, but with witnessing. You become the monk in the storm, the breath that stays steady, the step that stays slow, the eyes that stay clear. And in time, the panic begins to arrive less often. Not because you fought it away, because you stopped feeding it. This is the deepest rebellion, not loud, not angry, just still, just present, just unwilling to play the game anymore, the game of urgency, the game of escape, the game of fixing. You end the game by refusing to move. You let the storm rage, and you become the silence inside it. And as you breathe now, as your chest rises with less resistance, as your mind begins to understand that it doesn't have to chase the fear, you feel it. Not absence of panic, presence of peace, not because you earned it, because you stayed, because you watched without reacting, because you became the eye of your own storm, and that quietly changes everything. Now that you've learned to stand still while panic moves like a storm around you, without obeying, without rushing to fix, you've reclaimed something sacred. Not control, but presence. Not resistance, but steadiness. Yet when the storm settles and the breath softens, something else begins to emerge in its place. Not relief, not emptiness, but a feeling so quiet it's often missed. A flicker of lightness in the chest, a lifting, a soft upward pull from within that isn't loud or dramatic. It's the beginning of joy, not forced, not painted on, but real. This is where we go next, the smile that wasn't forced. In a world that teaches you to perform your emotions, to look happy, sound okay, seem stable, real joy often gets buried under the pressure to seem fine. But fine is not freedom. And Buddhist wisdom never asks you to pretend. It only invites you to feel what's true without distortion. That includes pain, yes, but also joy. And not the kind you manufacture to fit in. The kind that bubbles up when anxiety loosens its grip and the body remembers what it feels like to be safe again. Anxiety teaches you to brace, to scan, to worry, to prepare for the next problem. But joy asks you to soften, to trust, to let this moment be enough, and not as a performance, but as a presence. You don't need to earn joy. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to be fully healed or perfect to feel it. You only need to stop forcing it and let it arrive on its own terms. The smile that isn't forced doesn't come from faking positivity. It comes when your nervous system feels seen and held. When the part of you that's been hiding finally feels safe enough to step into the light. This kind of joy is small at first, quiet, a gentle sense that maybe, just maybe, everything doesn't have to be so heavy all the time. In Buddhist practice, joy is considered a spiritual strength, not a luxury, not a distraction, but a real form of medicine. It's called piti, a kind of joyful interest in being alive, not the noisy kind of happiness that needs validation. The silent joy that arrives when you're present enough to notice the warmth of a blanket, the sound of wind through leaves, the rhythm of your own breathing. And here's the paradox. Joy is one of the most powerful tools against anxiety, but only when it isn't used as a weapon against it. The moment you try to force joy to replace fear, you turn it into performance. You turn your healing into another task. You smile because you should, not because you want to. And your body knows the difference. But when joy is allowed to come naturally, it disarms anxiety without needing to fight it. It simply takes up space that anxiety used to fill. That means you don't need to chase joy. You just stop pushing it away. Stop thinking it's inappropriate. Stop believing you're not allowed to feel light because your life isn't fixed yet. Joy is not the end of the journey. It's a companion along the way. And sometimes it shows up in the smallest of ways. A laugh you didn't expect. A breath that feels easy. A tiny smile that arrives while you're doing something ordinary. The more you notice it without trying to control it, the more it returns. Anxiety hates stillness. It hates laughter. It hates softness because it thrives on tension and urgency. Joy is its opposite energy, not because it's louder, but because it's rooted, grounded, spacious. When you smile without forcing it, your body releases chemicals that tell your brain, we're safe here. Not because you lied to yourself, but because something true was finally felt. That truth might be quiet, it might be fleeting, but it's real, and every moment of real joy is a seed. Even if it only lasts a breath, it plants something. Over time, those seeds grow. They make your inner world less hospitable to fear. Not by resisting fear, but by giving it less room. You start to learn that joy isn't something that visits perfect lives. It visits honest ones. The kind of life where pain is felt fully, where fear is acknowledged, where the smile comes not as a mask, but as a gift. And that smile doesn't need to be seen by anyone else. Sometimes it rises in solitude with no audience, and that's where it's strongest, because you're not performing, you're participating in life just as it is, without the weight of pretending. This is what Buddhist teachers mean when they say, joy is the letting go of heaviness, not ignoring suffering, not denying hardship, but releasing the story that you must carry all of it alone, all of the time. Sometimes, real joy comes not from adding anything, but from letting go of the effort to be anything other than who you are in this breath. And when you feel that, even briefly, it creates a crack in the wall that anxiety built. Light gets in, and that light is warm. It tells the body, this is allowed. Not later, now. You don't need to chase it. You just need to stay soft enough to notice when it visits. And when it does, don't question it. Don't ask if it's earned. Don't wonder if it's real. Just let it move through you. Let it lift the corners of your mouth. Let it warm your chest. Even if it fades quickly, it did something. It reminded your system that not every moment has to be a struggle. This kind of joy becomes a refuge, not an escape, but a return to the part of you that never stopped believing in something lighter, even during the hardest seasons. And over time, this joy starts showing up more often. Not because your life is suddenly perfect, but because you stopped guarding against the good. You stopped rehearsing sadness so tightly that joy couldn't get through. Now, the invitation is simple. Let your joy be small. Let it be honest. Let it arrive in the middle of everything, not at the end. Let it come even when your story isn't finished, even when your healing is still unfolding. Because that smile that wasn't forced, it's a sign that the weight is no longer running the show. It's a sign that you're here, alive, and still open to light. So now that joy has been welcomed in its truest form, not as a mask, but as a quiet, honest presence, you begin to see that peace doesn't always mean pushing fear away. A smile that isn't forced proves that light can coexist with the darker parts of you. But what happens when fear rises again? When it doesn't leave quietly? When it doesn't respect the calm you've cultivated? This next part is not about pushing fear back out. It's about making space big enough for it to be there without it taking over. It's about understanding that silence doesn't mean nothing is present. It means there is room for everything, even fear. Most people are taught that calm and fear cannot exist in the same place. That fear has to be conquered, removed, solved. But Buddhist insight teaches a different truth, one that softens that demand. It teaches that real calm is not fragile. It doesn't break the moment fear enters the room. It expands, it stretches, it opens wide enough to hold the fear without reacting to it. This is the foundation of emotional spaciousness, a capacity that grows inside you not by forcing fear away, but by making it feel seen and safe. You're not inviting it to stay forever. You're simply choosing not to exile it. Fear, like every emotion, wants to be felt, not obeyed, not avoided, just noticed, just heard. And the silence we speak of here isn't emptiness. It's the kind of silence that listens, the kind of stillness that allows everything to show up, without trying to make any of it disappear. There's a kind of courage in that, a quiet, steady kind that doesn't push against fear or collapse under it. It just says, I have space for this. No flinching, no rushing to analyze, just presence. And that kind of presence is what dissolves panic at the root, because fear becomes louder when it feels ignored. It grows sharper when you resist it. But when you stop trying to shove it out and instead make a little room for it, the urgency starts to fade. The body learns, this fear can be here and I'm still okay. That's what silence teaches. Not avoidance, but inclusion. Not silence because nothing is wrong, but silence because there's no need to argue with what's rising. And this kind of silence doesn't mean stillness on the outside. It means not adding noise on the inside. It means letting the fear speak without speaking over it, without believing every word it says. Most people think silence is a fragile thing, like it will be broken by the first loud emotion. But the silence cultivated through practice, the silence found in meditation, in breath, in compassionate awareness, isn't glass. It's sky. Fear can storm through it, but it never fills it completely. And that shift in how you hold fear changes everything. Instead of bracing, you soften. Instead of hiding from it, you sit beside it. Instead of identifying with it, you observe it. And in that space, fear starts to transform. It doesn't vanish, but it starts to shrink. It becomes less of a command, more of a sensation, less of a threat, more of a signal. And signals are just information. They don't require obedience. The silence that has room for fear is the same silence that held your joy, the same space that let the smile arrive without force. It's all the same container, spacious enough to hold contradiction, spacious enough to let fear and calm exist together. This kind of inner silence is not something you wait for. It's something you practice. In the middle of racing thoughts, in the middle of uncertainty, you practice by not filling the space with reaction. And when fear rises, as it inevitably will, you let it come. You feel it in the body, the chest tightening, the throat narrowing, the heat in the skin, and you don't rush to explain it away. You breathe. You say inwardly, this too can be here. And that one sentence tells your nervous system something new. That fear is not a fire to put out. It's a wave to allow. And the more you allow it, the less it burns. The more you allow it, the more it loses the power to define you. You are not the fear. You are the space it rises in, and that space is vast. This is why Buddhist teachings place so much importance on emptiness, not as nothingness, but as infinite possibility. A mind that isn't crowded with judgment and resistance has room for every emotion, even fear, especially fear. Because fear, when allowed to exist without reaction, becomes one more visitor. It's no longer the ruler of the house. It's just someone passing through. You can watch it. You can breathe through it. You can give it enough space to dissolve on its own. And this doesn't mean you're giving in. It means you're no longer fighting what doesn't need to be fought. You're no longer building stories around the fear that amplify it. You're no longer treating it like an emergency that must be solved. This is not easy at first, but it becomes more natural the more you practice. You start to recognize the signs of fear earlier. You meet it with less resistance. You start trusting that your silence is stronger than the storm it tries to bring. And this changes how you sleep. how you rest, how you relate to others. Because you're no longer guarding your peace like it's a breakable thing. You're holding it like it's a field that can hold the wind, a field that can hold the rain, and still remain. So the next time fear visits, let it knock, let it speak, let it stay for a moment, but don't give it your name, don't give it your schedule, don't give it your breath, give it space, and in that space, stay silent. Not the silence of shutting down, the silence of not needing to run. That is the silence with room for fear. And in that room, you are free. Now that fear has been given space inside the silence, not banished, not obeyed, simply allowed to exist without controlling you, a deeper kind of clarity starts to form. You've seen that calm is not the absence of fear, but the room that holds it. But now another question rises, softer and wiser. If fear, joy, panic and stillness can all come and go, who is it that notices them? Who is it that sees all of this but isn't swept away? That question leads us into the next teaching. One of the most liberating truths in Buddhist practice, the mind that watches itself. There's a shift that happens when you stop being only inside your thoughts and begin to witness them from a higher perspective, not spiritually higher in the sense of being above others, but internally higher, like stepping up a small hill and watching the river below instead of being pulled under by its current. This capacity to observe your own thinking is known as metacognitive awareness. It's the moment you realize, I am having a thought, instead of I am the thought. This is the foundation of presence that no fear can destroy. When you start to watch the mind rather than get lost inside it, everything begins to change. Thoughts lose their grip, emotions lose their stickiness, panic loses its urgency, because now there's space between stimulus and response, and in that space you are no longer a puppet of the mind, you are the observer of it. This awareness is like becoming the sky. The thoughts and feelings are the weather, changing, moving, sometimes stormy, sometimes clear. But the sky doesn't get wet when it rains. The sky is never broken by lightning. The sky holds all of it without becoming any of it. And that's exactly what the mind can learn to do. But first, it has to be trained. Most people spend their lives believing that every thought they think is true, and that every emotion that rises must be acted on. But what if that's never been true? What if the thoughts are just events happening inside consciousness, not proof of anything? What if they're just mental weather, rising and falling like everything else in nature? The Buddha called this kind of awareness sati, or mindfulness. It doesn't mean being blank or empty. It means knowing what's happening in your own mind as it happens. It means having just enough space around your inner experience to choose how to respond. This doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you feel without being captured. You sense the anxiety, the tension, the racing thought, but you also sense the one who's watching it all. That part of you is always still, always clear. It doesn't argue, it doesn't panic, it just sees. And that seeing is healing, because the moment you can see the thought, it's no longer controlling you from the shadows. The moment you can name the feeling, it's no longer deciding your next move for you. Metacognition, thinking about your thoughts, isn't over-analyzing. It's stepping back just far enough to remember that not everything in the mind deserves a microphone. In daily practice, this looks simple. A thought arises, "I'm not good enough." And instead of letting it drive your emotions, you say internally, "There's that thought again." You name it. You breathe. You watch it pass like a car on the road. You don't get in. You just observe. And with time, that simple shift builds a profound inner peace. Not because the thoughts stop, but because your relationship to them changes. Instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of spinning, you pause. Instead of fearing the next wave, you become the shoreline. And the beauty of this is that it's always available. You don't need to be in a monastery or on a mountaintop. You can do it lying in bed at 2 a.m. when the mind won't slow down. You can do it when anxiety grips your chest. You can do it when you feel overwhelmed by too much noise in your head. All you do is notice. This is a thought. This is fear. This is an old pattern. This is my mind replaying something painful. You name it, not to judge, not to push it away, but to remind yourself, I am not this, I am the one watching this. That identity shift is liberation. Because if you are the storm, you must fix it, outrun it, survive it. But if you are the sky, you just have to wait, watch, breathe. Let the storm do what storms do, pass. This doesn't mean you never act. It means you stop acting from the place of panic. You wait until the observer is present, until the breath has returned, until clarity, not chaos, is guiding your response. And this kind of presence can become a daily rhythm. Throughout your day, you pause, you ask, what's happening in my mind right now? Not to fix it, just to know, to shine light on it. That light alone often changes the direction of everything. A worry, when seen clearly, loses its charge. A judgment, when held gently, softens. A wave of anxiety, when watched instead of fed, crests and falls away. And even when the mind is messy, busy, restless, repetitive, you still hold that space. You still remember, this is not who I am, this is what is moving through. The mind that watches itself also becomes kinder over time. Because once you stop believing every self-critical thought, once you stop obeying every fearful voice, compassion starts to take root. Not as a strategy, but as your natural baseline. You stop being harsh. You stop demanding perfection. You begin to treat your thoughts like guests rather than invaders. Some are welcome. Some are not. But none define you. And that changes how you hold your past. It changes how you navigate your future. It gives you access to a present moment that is wide and deep and rich with stillness. You no longer wait for your mind to be quiet in order to feel peace. You create peace by watching the mind instead of merging with it. This is what it means to be the sky. You don't need the weather to be perfect. You only need to remember that the weather is not you. So the next time a wave of fear hits, step back. Watch it rise. Name it softly. Hold your breath with care. And remind yourself, there is thinking, but there is also me. That second voice, the one that sees without judging, the one that breathes without pushing, the one that watches without reacting, that voice is the real you. And the more you live from that place, the freer you become. No thought can trap you. No panic can own you. No storm can take away the sky, because you found the one who sees, and that seeing is enough. Now that the sky has been found within you, that vast awareness that can witness every storm without becoming it, a deeper kind of freedom begins to unfold. The mind that watches itself brings clarity, but clarity alone doesn't always bring ease. Because even with awareness, there are moments when the cup tips, when you lose your temper, when you cry too hard, when fear overtakes you, when all the stillness you've practiced seems to fall apart in a single moment of emotional overwhelm. This next part of your journey is about how you respond to those moments, not with judgment, but with grace. This is the teaching of the cup that spilled. We've all had moments where we didn't hold ourselves together, where something small triggered something deep, where words flew out too fast, where tears came in public, where we couldn't explain why we were suddenly drowning in a feeling we thought we'd already healed. These are the moments that shame loves to feed on. It whispers that you've failed, that your growth wasn't real, that you're too sensitive or too weak. But Buddhist wisdom doesn't see it that way. It doesn't treat emotion as a mistake. It treats it as movement, part of the living current of being human. And when a cup spills, it doesn't mean the cup was wrong. It means it was full. That's all. And sometimes being full is the most honest thing you can be. Shame turns a human moment into a moral flaw. It says, you shouldn't feel this, you should be past this, you should have handled that better. But what if the spilling wasn't failure at all? What if it was the body trying to release something it could no longer carry in silence? What if it was a kind of truth your nervous system was brave enough to speak when your mouth couldn't? The cup that spills gracefully is not a mess, it's a surrender. It's the wisdom of the body saying, this pain needs to move now. Not because you're broken, because you're alive. And grace comes not in preventing the spill, but in how you meet yourself afterward, without punishment, without labeling yourself as unstable, without turning one moment of release into a lifelong story of guilt. The practice is to say, yes, I spilled, and I still belong. That belonging, especially in the face of emotional vulnerability, is what begins to dissolve shame at its roots. Because shame thrives in isolation, in silence, in the fear that if anyone saw the real you, they'd leave. But what if that's not true? What if spilling is what makes you trustworthy to others? What if your rawness is the thing that makes others exhale? In Buddhist teaching, one of the central virtues is karuna, compassion for suffering, both your own and others. It's not about fixing, it's about staying present. And when your own emotions spill over, compassion doesn't look like pushing them back in. It looks like kneeling beside the mess without flinching. It looks like saying, this too is part of the path. You don't clean yourself up to be worthy. You are already worthy. Even when you're shaking, even when your voice cracks, even when you cry in the middle of a sentence and can't finish your thought. That's what grace looks like. Not performance, presence. And the more you practice meeting your own spills with softness, the less shame has to say, the less power it holds. It might still show up, trying to make you small. But now you know better. You know that emotion is not weakness, it's movement. And movement is life. You don't have to explain why you cried. You don't have to justify why a moment felt too big. The spill speaks its own language. And if you listen with kindness, instead of critique, you start to understand what was underneath it. Often, it's not just the thing that triggered you, it's the history it touched. The moment was new, but the feeling was old, and the spill was a release, not of just this pain, but of everything it brought to the surface. This is not regression, this is release, and the beautiful thing is, the more you allow yourself to spill without shame, the less often you spill in ways that harm. Because the body learns, I don't have to hold it all. I don't have to build pressure until I explode. I can soften before the edge. I can exhale instead of collapse. But that learning only happens when you stop punishing yourself for the moments that got too big. There's a kind of elegance in an honest breakdown, a kind of intelligence in tears, not always visible, not always understood, but real. And when you can see your own emotional expression through the eyes of understanding instead of judgment, you also learn how to offer that same understanding to others. You become the person who doesn't panic when someone else falls apart. You become the calm in someone else's storm, not because you've never spilled, but because you know what it's like to spill and still be held. And that, more than anything, builds safety. Not perfection, but permission. The kind that says, you don't have to hold it all. You're allowed to be full. You're allowed to release. That's how we move through emotion without drowning in it. Not by bracing, by bowing, by letting the spill happen and trusting that it doesn't define us. Because what defines you is not that you broke down, it's that you met your own breaking with care. You became the witness instead of the judge. You learned that healing isn't a straight line. You stopped treating your nervous system like a machine and started honoring it like a living, breathing organism. And now you can return to stillness, not because you forced yourself back into it, but because you allowed what needed to move to move. Now you're not holding shame, you're holding space, and in that space, the next moment of peace can arrive, not to replace the spill, but to rise from it. Because grace never means avoiding the mess, it means loving yourself through it. Now that you've stepped away from shame and offered grace to the parts of yourself that overflowed, the inner pressure begins to shift. You're no longer carrying the weight of judgment for being human. You've given yourself permission to feel and release without punishment. And in that release, something else quietly emerges. A question many overlook. How do you keep anxiety from building up again? How do you meet life before the cup even begins to fill too high? The next step is simpler than most expect. It's not found in one grand act of healing, but in small, repeated movements, in the ordinary, in the rhythm of your daily life. This is where we discover the kindness hidden in routine. Most people overlook the power of routine because it seems mundane. It doesn't have the drama of breakthrough or the excitement of transformation. But in Buddhist teachings, simplicity holds immense strength. When done with awareness, even the most basic act, making tea, folding clothes, walking slowly, becomes a doorway to stillness. These are not chores, they're invitations, and the way you approach them shapes the mind's rhythm far more than you think. An anxious mind is usually searching for control. It scans the future. It replays the past. It rehearses, anticipates, prepares. But a routine that's held with gentle presence becomes an anchor. It teaches the body something different. We are here. We are safe. We know what happens next. There is profound relief in that. And the kindness in routine isn't in the act itself, it's in the intention. Washing a cup with full attention becomes a meditation. Preparing food with care becomes a message to your nervous system. This moment matters. These are not mechanical movements. They're expressions of tenderness. They say, even if nothing extraordinary is happening, I still choose to show up with care. This is what transforms daily life from autopilot into practice. You start seeing the space between things. You pause before rushing. You feel the warmth of the water. You smell the tea as it steeps. You hear the rhythm of your own steps. It sounds simple, but for a worried mind, these moments become medicine. Routine is often dismissed as boring, but boredom only exists when presence is missing. With presence, repetition becomes poetry. A familiar task becomes a ritual, and rituals are sacred, not because they change the world outside, but because they stabilize the world within. Think of brushing your teeth, for example. You can rush through it while the mind runs wild, or you can slow it down just slightly. Feel the motion, hear the sound. Let it become a moment of anchoring. Same action, different quality. One adds to anxiety, the other dissolves it. And this practice can be brought into anything. Making your bed, preparing a simple meal, sweeping the floor, even how you greet your day. Instead of jumping into plans, take one breath at the edge of your bed. Let your feet touch the ground slowly. Let the first movement of your day be conscious. When you do this, you're telling the anxious part of your mind, we don't need to sprint, we're safe to arrive slowly. These small practices build nervous system trust. Over time, they reduce the background noise of fear. Because what anxiety fears most is unpredictability. But routine, approached with softness, creates a rhythm the mind can rest in. And this rhythm doesn't have to be rigid. It's not about following a schedule perfectly. It's about finding repeated places in your day where you return to the body, to the breath, to the texture of what's right in front of you. Even the act of lighting a candle at night, wiping down the table before bed, or tidying up your space becomes a reminder. There is order here. There is care here. There is presence. This becomes especially important during times of transition or stress. When the world outside is uncertain, your routines can hold you. They become a structure that doesn't depend on how you feel. Even on days when anxiety is loud, you can still make the tea. You can still put on clean clothes. You can still make the bed. And in doing so, you remind yourself, this storm may be inside me, but I still know how to take one small, kind step. This is how chronic worry begins to soften, not because you've solved every future problem, but because you've learned how to stay present inside the ordinary. You don't have to be fearless. You only have to return to now, one ritual at a time. Buddhist monastic life is structured almost entirely on routine, not to control the monks, but to free them. When you no longer have to decide what comes next, the mind relaxes. The heart opens. Each action, when done with attention, becomes an act of devotion, not to a god, to life. You can bring that same spirit into your home, into your mornings, into your evenings, into the way you eat, rest, walk, or even speak to yourself. Turn the repetition into rhythm. Turn the rhythm into peace. And don't worry if your routines feel simple. Simplicity is not a weakness. it's a blessing. When the mind is tired from anxiety, it doesn't need complexity. It needs familiarity, something it can trust, something it can lean into without fear. And when you meet those moments with awareness, they become something deeper. The way you tie your shoes becomes a kind of prayer. The way you wash your face becomes a way of saying, I still choose to care for myself, even today. That is not small. That is strength. Because it's easy to act with care when you feel good, but it's powerful to act with care even when the mind is unsettled, even when nothing feels certain. This is how routines become your ally, not as tasks to complete, as opportunities to reconnect. And the more you reconnect, the more grounded you become. You begin to trust your own presence. You begin to feel at home, not just in your space, but in your body. And the more at home you feel, the less urgency anxiety has to build on. Because now, you don't only wait for the big healing moment. You live it, one brushstroke at a time, one sip of water, one folded towel, one gentle breath. The kindness hidden in routine isn't hidden at all. It's just quiet. And now that you've slowed down enough to hear it, it will begin to guide you, softly, steadily, home. Now that you've begun to anchor yourself in the softness of routine, where daily actions become quiet affirmations that life can be simple and safe, you start to notice something else hidden beneath the rhythm. The mind, no longer distracted by chaos, starts speaking more clearly, but not always kindly. It creates stories, anxious ones that jump ahead to the worst outcome or replay the most painful memory. Stories that begin without warning and spiral quickly. But if you look closely, you'll see something the mind rarely draws attention to: the gap between those stories. A brief space, a pause. This next part of your journey is about learning to live in that pause, to return to the breath that waits in the space between anxious narratives, to stop letting every thought drag you into its theater and start listening to what exists before the story begins. The anxious mind is often a storyteller, not a gentle one, but a narrator of doom. It weaves a plot out of every possibility, predicts failure, imagines loss, exaggerates danger. And because the stories come dressed in your voice and filled with emotional weight, they feel true. They feel urgent. But the truth is, they're just patterns. They're not proof. And those stories aren't the problem on their own. The problem is how often we follow them without pause, how quickly we go from a single thought to an entire imagined future, how rarely we stop to ask, is this even happening? But if you begin to pay attention, not to the content of the story, but to its rhythm, you'll notice something remarkable. The stories don't run non-stop. They have gaps. Right after one thought ends and before the next begins, there's a breath, a space, a quiet blink of awareness. That space is everything, because that's where your freedom lives, not in rewriting the thought, not in outsmarting the anxiety, but in recognizing the breath that sits between thoughts, waiting for you to return. The pause between stories is small but sacred. It's the moment your mind is not being pulled forward or dragged back. It's the only place that isn't rehearsing or remembering. It's just here. And in that here-ness, anxiety begins to lose its authority. Because the stories only have power when you follow them. But in the pause, you don't follow. You observe. You hear the anxious thought. What if everything goes wrong? You pause. You breathe. You don't respond. You don't resist. You don't feed it. And in that gap, the thought passes without turning into a spiral. This is not avoidance. This is mastery. Because anxious thoughts will always come. The key is not in preventing them. The key is in not giving them momentum. The pause is what interrupts momentum. It says, wait, I'm still here. I haven't left myself. I haven't gone with you. And the more often you return to this pause, the easier it becomes to live from it. At first, it's subtle, just a few seconds of stillness before the next thought arrives. But with practice, that stillness stretches. It becomes a place you visit on purpose, a place you rest inside, even while the mind continues to chatter. And what lives inside that pause is breath. Not dramatic, just simple, just steady. The inhale that arrives on its own, the exhale that doesn't need permission. And that breath becomes your anchor, not because it fixes anything, but because it doesn't lie. It's the one part of you not built on imagination. It's happening now, and now is the only place anxiety can't survive for long. Because anxiety is rooted in anticipation, but the breath is rooted in presence. And the more you root yourself in presence, the more you stop being dragged from moment to moment by mental fiction. You stop being the character in the anxious narrative and start becoming the witness of it. You hear the thought, I won't be able to handle it. You pause. You feel your breath. You realize, I haven't been asked to handle anything yet. That realization cuts the story's fuel line. You don't need to resolve it. You only need to return. And returning happens in the pause. This practice becomes your inner refuge, the place you go, not to escape, but to remember what's real. And the beauty of the pause is that it doesn't require silence in your environment. It doesn't depend on perfect conditions. You can pause in the middle of a crowded room, in the middle of a difficult conversation, in the middle of washing the dishes. You don't need to close your eyes. You only need to notice the breath, to feel the gap between one thought and the next, to rest your attention not on the story, but on the space around it. That space is where truth lives. Because thoughts speak loudly, but they're not always wise. The pause doesn't speak at all, but it always tells the truth. And here's what that truth often whispers. You're okay right now. Not forever. Not in every possible future. Just now. And now is always the doorway to peace. This doesn't mean you never think. It means you stop mistaking every thought for guidance. You become less interested in finishing the story and more curious about the silence that holds it. And that silence is not emptiness, it's presence. It's the part of you that doesn't get pulled. It's the same presence that sits behind your eyes when you're staring at the sky, not thinking about anything in particular. The same presence that arrives when you're deeply listening, not preparing a response. The same presence that watches your breath without needing to change it. That's what lives in the pause. And the more you find it, the more you trust it. Because unlike the anxious mind, the pause doesn't demand. It invites. It doesn't scare. It soothes. It doesn't promise anything. It just offers you back to yourself. So now, the practice becomes simple. Notice the story. Pause. Notice the next story. Pause again. Return to the breath. Not to get somewhere, but to stop being dragged. And in time, you'll realize something profound. The stories haven't stopped, but you've stopped disappearing into them. You've become the one who stays. You've learned that between each anxious sentence, there is a moment of quiet waiting to hold you. And that quiet, that's your home. Now that you've learned to pause between stories, to notice the breath that lives in the gap instead of falling into the rhythm of fear, you've tasted a deeper stillness. A stillness that doesn't require the world to go quiet, one that waits patiently behind every anxious narrative. But sometimes, even that pause isn't enough to soothe the nervous system that's been on high alert for too long. When the breath is shallow, when the body feels far away, when the mind is stuck in a loop that presence alone can't soften, there is one more gesture to return to. A physical reminder, a bridge between the breath and the body. This next step is where the hand meets the breath. There is something ancient and immediate about the act of placing a hand on your body with care. The world doesn't teach this. In fact, most people spend their lives disconnected from their own touch, living from the neck up, navigating thoughts, while the body becomes a background hum. But Buddhist and somatic teachings both point toward this truth. The body needs acknowledgement to feel safe. It needs physical assurance that it is not being abandoned during fear. The nervous system doesn't settle with logic. It settles with presence, and touch is one of the oldest forms of presence we know. When you place your hand on your chest or belly with intention, something in you softens, not because the fear disappears, but because you are no longer running from yourself. You are saying without words, I am here, I'm listening, I won't leave. And when that gesture is paired with breath awareness, it becomes more than comfort. It becomes medicine, because the breath is the nervous system's language and your hand is its witness. It's easy to underestimate this. It's easy to think a single breath and a resting hand couldn't possibly compete with the speed and volume of panic. But they're not trying to compete. They're returning you to slowness. And slowness is what anxiety can't survive in. When your breath becomes your focus and your hand rests with kindness, your system hears a new message, one it rarely gets in a life built on urgency. It hears you're safe, not because there's no danger, but because you are being met right here in the moment that exists. This meeting of breath and hand does not need to be dramatic. It can happen at the edge of your bed, on the floor of your shower, at your desk, in the car. You don't need a meditation cushion. You only need your presence. Your hand can rest lightly over your heart, over your diaphragm, or on your abdomen, wherever the breath feels most alive, and you simply stay. You let the inhale rise beneath your palm. You let the exhale fall into it. No goal, no control, just being with the breath like you would sit beside someone you love who is hurting. That's what makes this powerful, not the technique, the intention, the refusal to abandon yourself when discomfort shows up, the choice to stay physically with your experience instead of floating above it in thoughts. And as you breathe like this, with the hand as anchor, the body begins to receive the signal it's been craving, that it no longer needs to brace, that it no longer has to prepare for impact, that it no longer has to tighten to stay alive. You might notice tension releasing in the jaw, the belly, the shoulders. You might feel heat rise or emotion come forward. That's not a failure of the practice. That's the body finally believing it's allowed to let go. And when this becomes a habit, you start to rewrite the entire emotional pattern you've lived with. Because now, when anxiety visits, you don't go to war with it. You meet it with breath. You hold it with your own hands. You let it speak without giving it the microphone. You let it sit without giving it the driver's seat. Over time, this trains your system to associate your own presence with safety. That's something most people never experience. Many grow up learning that comfort comes from outside, from someone else's approval, someone else's arms, someone else's calming words. But this practice returns that comfort to where it always belonged, within you. It teaches you that you can be the one who holds yourself in moments of fear, that you don't need to wait for the world to reassure you, that you don't need someone else to tell you you're okay. You can show yourself, not because you're alone, because you're whole. That's the deepest healing. When the nervous system learns that your own touch, your own breath, and your own presence are enough to begin the calming process. This is not always immediate. Some days, the breath may still feel tight, the hand may feel awkward, the anxiety may still speak loudly. That's okay. The goal isn't silence, it's relationship. Every time you return to the hand and the breath, you're building that relationship. You're strengthening the pathway back to safety. You're reminding your body, even now, I will not abandon you. And this practice becomes even more powerful when paired with compassionate words. Not affirmations that try to override fear, but simple, truthful reminders like, it's okay to feel this. I'm here. This moment will pass. I can breathe through this. You don't need to believe the words right away. You just need to say them with kindness. To speak to your fear the way you'd speak to a child who is overwhelmed, not with correction, but with comfort. The hand, the breath, and the voice together become a triad of self-compassion, a pattern interrupt for anxiety, a signal that fear does not need to be shamed, it needs to be met. And the more you practice this, not as a fix, but as a habit, the more your baseline shifts. Your body begins to trust that not every fast heartbeat is an emergency, that not every discomfort is a sign to escape, that not every emotion needs to be suppressed. Because now it knows what to do. It knows how to sit, how to breathe, how to soften, and you no longer have to wait for the perfect conditions to find peace. You carry the conditions with you, your hand, your breath, your willingness to stay. So tonight, if your thoughts speed up, or your chest feels tight, or the wave of anxiety rises for no reason you can name, pause. Place your hand where you feel the breath most clearly. Let your palm rest, not to fix, but to be with. Let your breath come in and out without force. And remember, this is enough. You are enough. Even now, especially now that you've placed your own hand over your breath and remembered what it feels like to stay, gently, patiently, with your body during moments of fear, something deeper begins to settle. That act of touch wasn't just comfort, it was a message, and your body, more than your mind, received it. That message didn't end with one breath or one moment. It entered your system like a seed that now begins to stir something long buried beneath the tension. The memory of a different rhythm, the memory of calm. This next chapter returns to that quiet place inside you that never forgot, the body that remembers stillness. Most people think the body only remembers pain, but that's only part of the truth. Yes, it remembers trauma, stress, alarm. It remembers the posture you took when life became too loud, the tight shoulders, the clenched jaw, the curled spine. But just as deeply, it remembers rest. It remembers softness. It remembers safety. And that memory is not lost. It's waiting. Stillness is not just an absence of movement. It's a presence of something else, something ancient. A quality of being that doesn't ask, doesn't reach, doesn't push. It simply is. And your body has known that state before. You may not remember it in your mind, but your nervous system does. There were moments, even if few, when you were at ease. Maybe as a child, lying in the sun. Maybe in the quiet of a room where no one asked anything from you. Maybe after a long cry, or a deep sleep, or a moment so peaceful you didn't even notice how calm you were until it passed. That calm is still in your system. It didn't disappear. It just got covered up by years of tension, responsibility, noise, fear. The body that remembers stillness is not broken. It's simply buried under habit. And the good news is, you don't need to think your way back. You only need to position yourself in ways that remind the body what peace feels like. That's where posture becomes a gateway. Not the rigid kind you force to look confident, but the kind you adopt when no one's watching. The posture of ease, of being supported, of letting go. In Buddhist monastic life, posture is a practice. Sitting upright without stiffness, grounded but relaxed, the spine like a mountain but the shoulders like water. This alignment isn't just symbolic, it creates actual feedback to the nervous system. It says, this body is safe enough to rest. You can practice this at any time, on a chair, on the floor, even lying down. What matters is the way you inhabit the pose, not with performance, but with presence. Feel your feet against the floor. Let your hands rest where they naturally want to fall. Release the jaw. Soften the gaze. Let your weight be held by gravity instead of resisted by muscle. The moment you allow yourself to be held, the body begins to return to its older knowledge, the knowledge of what it feels like to stop running. Stillness isn't something you have to invent. It's something you return to. And when you repeat this often enough, even for short moments, the body begins to rewire its assumptions. It no longer believes that rest is dangerous. It no longer believes that tension is survival. It starts to trust the ground again. That's when somatic memory awakens. Not just in your thoughts, but in your tissue, your breath, your spine. You might start to notice that your body begins to anticipate calm, that it responds faster to your cues, that it stops bracing for disaster every time there's silence. And this changes how you move through the world. Because a body that remembers stillness walks differently, speaks differently, breathes differently. It listens instead of reacts. It settles instead of scans. It knows how to return home even when the environment is loud. Stillness-based rituals help this happen even more deeply. These don't have to be elaborate. In fact, the simpler, the better. A ritual might be 5 minutes of sitting in quiet after you wake up. It might be a slow walk without a destination. It might be lying on the floor with your eyes closed, letting the earth hold you. What matters is repetition. The body doesn't learn from ideas, it learns from rhythm, from doing the same thing with the same intention again and again until the pattern becomes familiar. Each time you return to your ritual, you're not just relaxing. You're training the body to recognize safety, not as a rare state, but as a baseline. And this shift happens gradually. The nervous system begins to believe this stillness is not a threat. This stillness is a home. From here, anxiety begins to loosen. Not because you've eliminated all triggers, but because your inner world no longer reacts the same way. Stillness becomes the new default. Even if the mind wanders, the body remembers. Even if fear speaks, the breath stays steady. Even if tension rises, the posture knows how to realign. And this doesn't mean you become passive. Stillness is not frozen. It's awake. It's responsive without being reactive. It allows you to act from clarity instead of panic. You stop bracing for life. You start participating in it. And others can feel this. A person who moves from stillness creates calm around them, not by force, but by presence. They become a mirror, a ground, a reminder. And this is not something reserved for monks or mystics. It's available to you. Through practice, through posture, through remembering. Each time you return to stillness, your body says, "Ah, yes, this, I know this." And over time, it doesn't take 20 minutes of sitting to find it. It might only take a breath, or a shoulder drop, or the act of closing your eyes for just 3 seconds in a crowded space. Stillness becomes portable. It travels with you, because now it's not something you try to achieve, it's something you embody. And when the body knows stillness, the mind no longer has to scream to be heard. Anxiety becomes just one part of the experience, not the center of it. And peace is no longer a distant idea. It's the echo of a memory your body never truly lost, only needed help remembering. Now that your body has started remembering stillness, not as something rare but as something familiar, your entire nervous system has begun to shift. You've discovered that calm isn't something to chase. It's something you already carry when the tension in your posture is released and your breath is welcomed home. But even as the body softens, the mind still circles. It clings to thoughts that feel unfinished, unresolved, unanswered. It keeps returning to loops that feel like open doors. This next part of your journey is learning what the mind finds most difficult to believe, that not every door needs to close. That peace is not found in finishing every thought, but in releasing the need to finish at all. The human mind wants conclusion. It seeks endings. It longs for resolution. And this isn't wrong. It's how the brain organizes experience. But anxiety takes this natural desire and inflates it into obsession. It convinces you that until every question is answered, every scenario is settled, and every loose end is tied up, you can't rest. That's the trap. The anxious mind doesn't just think, it tries to control thought itself. It demands that every internal sentence make sense, that every worry be calmed with logic, that every unfinished story in your head be given closure. But life doesn't work that way. Some situations remain unclear. Some relationships don't resolve. Some fears never get disproven. Some questions don't get answered. And that's not failure. That's reality. The door that doesn't need to close is the one you learn to walk away from. It's the thought that rises without permission, that circles for hours, that feels like it needs one more minute, one more analysis, one more explanation. And instead of chasing it, you let it stay open. You let the breeze come through. You stop trying to shut it tight. This isn't giving up. This is freedom. Because finishing the thought was never what gave you peace. It was the effort to finish that kept you stuck. In Buddhism, this is understood through the concept of non-grasping. Letting go not because you've completed something, but because clinging was the only thing keeping it alive. Thoughts, like wind, come and go. But the mind, especially when anxious, wants to turn that wind into architecture. It wants to build a house out of every breeze. It turns fragments into puzzles. It treats emotional noise like a code to solve. But what if you stop solving? What if the thought can stay incomplete? The beauty of this is that the moment you give yourself permission not to resolve, the mind slows. The loop weakens, not because you pushed it away, but because you stopped giving it fuel. Most obsessive thought patterns feed on one thing: your belief that they must end a certain way. But when you stop needing the ending, you take away the urgency, and this changes everything. The thought still comes, but it no longer drags you. It no longer holds your attention like a hostage. You see it, acknowledge it, and you let it drift. This is where breath helps again. When a thought begins its loop, meet it with a breath instead of a solution. Inhale. This thought doesn't need closure. Exhale. I can rest anyway. It might feel strange at first, incomplete, like you're leaving something undone. That's okay. That's part of the practice. Because peace is not the result of a perfect narrative. Peace is what arises when you step back from the story. There's a teaching in Zen that says, the mind wants to land, but you are the sky. That means thoughts are like birds. Some stay, some circle, some vanish. But you don't need to catch them all. You don't need to keep them all. You are the space they move through, not the net that traps them. Letting go of the need to finish every thought doesn't mean you become passive or careless. It means you choose presence over mental tension. It means you trust that some questions can sit unanswered without threatening your safety. And the irony is, many thoughts do resolve on their own, once you stop forcing them to. The mind, like the body, knows how to regulate, but not under pressure, not when pushed. Give your thoughts room to breathe. Let them float to the surface without immediately diving after them. Watch them rise like bubbles in a pond. Some will pop, some will linger, but none need to be grabbed. When you train yourself to do this gently, you begin to see how much of your mental suffering was not about the thought itself, but about the belief that you had to complete it. This is where rituals help again, not to distract, but to ground. When the loop starts, you return to your practice. You wash a dish, you fold a towel, you sit upright, you feel your feet, and you remind yourself, that thought is open, and it can stay open. Over time, the brain learns a new rhythm. It begins to understand that closure is optional, that relief can come from releasing the pressure, not resolving the content. And this brings profound rest. You stop bracing for the next loop. You stop waking up with the weight of all the thoughts left unfinished. You stop measuring your peace by the number of conclusions you've reached. and you start measuring it by how often you return to the breath. That breath becomes your new punctuation. A full stop. A gentle period where the story doesn't have to continue. You may notice the thought returning. That's okay. It's not failure. It's habit. Let it return. Let it repeat. And let it pass again. With each repetition, your system becomes more fluent in the language of non-attachment. This doesn't mean indifference. It means steadiness. You care, but you don't chase. You see, but you don't hold. You allow, but you don't build your home in the storm. This is the doorway that never needed to close. And now, finally, you see that walking away from it is not abandonment. It's maturity. You don't need to slam it. You don't need to seal it. You just turn your attention toward the quiet that waits elsewhere. And in that quiet, you find what every anxious thought has been trying to deliver through endless noise, the permission to rest, even when things aren't finished, especially then. Now that you've let the door stay open, released the habit of forcing closure, and learned to live inside a thought without needing it to resolve, your nervous system begins to breathe in a different way. The constant pressure to fix, to finish, to finalize has softened. You no longer need to chase every thought to the end of its thread. And in that space, something rare begins to grow, a sense of support, not dependent on answers. But freedom from thought doesn't always mean ease in the body. Even when the mind quiets, the body may still float, unmoored, like it doesn't fully trust the ground beneath it. The next step is to return to that ground, not in concept, in sensation. This is the seed of safe ground. An anxious body often loses contact with the earth, not because it's floating in some poetic way, but because it is disconnected from the simple, felt sense of being supported. In moments of fear or worry, the feet become invisible. The floor feels far away. Movement becomes tight and shallow, and the body subtly prepares for something to go wrong, tightening, lifting, bracing. To break this cycle, the mind doesn't need more explanation. The body needs contact. Grounding is not a metaphor. It's a literal experience of remembering through the senses that you are supported, that the world beneath you holds you without condition, that you do not need to carry your weight in the sky when there is solid earth right beneath you. It begins with the feet, not as symbols, but as actual sensations. Feel them now, wherever they are, inside shoes or barefoot, standing or sitting. Let your awareness rest on their contact with the floor, not with analysis, but with attention. You're not thinking about your feet, you're letting your mind rest in them. This may feel strange at first, foreign even, but it's only unfamiliar because anxiety pulls awareness upward, into the chest, into the head, into the abstract. Grounding pulls you back downward, into what is real, into what is touchable, into what doesn't ask you to fix or prove anything. Just feel the weight, the temperature, the pressure, and then widen the field. Feel the seat beneath you, the contact of your back, the support of whatever you're resting on. This is not a visualization. This is not imagining Earth. This is embodiment. You are remembering the felt sense of safety by turning attention toward what is already touching you. Because safety isn't always something to create. Sometimes it's something to notice. And when you notice with care, when you begin to build this attention into your daily life, your nervous system starts to adapt. Slowly, gently, it recalibrates. It stops floating in anticipation. It settles. You may feel warmth in your legs, heaviness in your limbs, slowness in your breath. These are all signs that your body is learning that the ground is trustworthy again. This doesn't make you numb, it makes you present. And presence, held through the contact of the body, becomes an internal refuge. This is what we mean by the seed of safe ground, a practice that doesn't require silence or control or perfection. A practice that begins where you are, using what you're already touching. You can practice this anywhere, in a line at the grocery store, at a red light, in the shower, during a hard conversation. You simply return your attention to your base, to the part of you that meets the earth. Feel your heels. Feel your thighs on the chair. Feel your spine stack gently. Feel your breath descend instead of rise. Even 2 seconds of this connection plants something. The more often you return to it, the more it grows. You begin to trust that you can be okay in your own body, not because you've solved everything, but because you've stopped living only in your thoughts. This trust becomes your inner soil, and the more it grows, the more your life slows in the best way. You stop rushing to escape discomfort. You stop flinching from every emotion. You stop floating above your own experience. Instead, you land. And landing doesn't mean you're stuck. It means you've remembered where safety lives, not in what you think, but in what you touch. This physical rooting also begins to shift your identity. You no longer see yourself as someone constantly waiting for danger. You begin to feel like someone who belongs, someone who can stay, someone who has somewhere to rest. That shift is subtle, but it changes everything. Because now, when fear shows up, you don't just meet it with breath. You meet it with ground. You feel it in your stomach, and instead of tensing, you drop your attention to your feet. You feel the adrenaline rise, and you let your hands rest on your thighs. You start to move through life with gravity, not heaviness, but anchoring. You move from a place that doesn't get pulled so easily. You walk differently. You speak slower. You breathe with more fullness. And you begin to realize that stability was never about controlling your schedule or environment. It was about knowing how to return to the earth inside your own body. This is how you start living from your base. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's powerful. Because a grounded person doesn't need to prove calm. They carry it. And they carry it not because life got easier, but because they learned how to stay in the moment without floating away. So now, this becomes your practice. When the world speeds up, you slow down. When the thoughts pull upward, you drop into contact. When the fear tightens, you widen your attention to include the ground. And slowly, the body begins to trust this rhythm. It remembers that stillness isn't empty. It remembers that presence isn't fragile. It remembers that safety can begin in the soles of your feet. This is how you grow the seed of safe ground, not all at once, but step by step, breath by breath, contact by contact, until peace becomes not something you wait for, but something you return to, every time you choose to feel what's already holding you. Now that the body has found its ground, felt the truth that safety lives in the contact between skin and earth, there is a new kind of steadiness growing inside. A stillness that doesn't depend on thought, a calm that lives under the story, But even with the body anchored and the breath returning home, the mind still tries to chase something, a fix, a reason, a way out. Especially in moments of uncertainty or fear, it runs, spinning through scenarios, looping through what-ifs, searching for a thread it can pull to make it all make sense. And yet, that chase often ends not with a solution, but with exhaustion. The path forward now is not in chasing at all. It's in stopping, not by force, but through one simple act, speaking to yourself with kindness. This is the whisper that ends the chase. In anxious moments, the voice in your mind can become sharp. Even if no one else hears it, you do. It becomes your narrator, telling you to figure it out now, warning you that time is running out, criticizing you for not being calm. It speaks with urgency, with authority. It pushes, it nags, it floods, and when the anxious voice is in charge, even your best coping tools can feel like they aren't working. The breath may still feel shallow. The body might stay tight. Thoughts don't slow. That's because this voice isn't asking to be managed. It's asking to be met. And the way you meet it determines whether you fuel the chase or bring it to a stop. There is something deeply powerful about the human nervous system's response to kindness. When spoken internally, kindness is not weakness, it's regulation. A kind phrase, repeated gently, not like a command, but like a lullaby, cuts through panic more effectively than argument. Because fear is not looking for information. It's looking for safety. And safety is not found in volume. It's found in tone. So what happens when you stop arguing with your fear and start whispering to it instead? Something shifts. The spiral slows. The noise loses its sharpness. The brain begins to recognize that it is no longer under attack, not even from itself. A kind phrase isn't about pretending. It's not about faking positivity. It's about choosing the voice you want to believe. And that voice doesn't have to be complicated. In fact, the simpler, the better. I'm here. I've got you. It's okay to feel this. This will pass. You're not alone. These phrases don't solve the problem, but they change the energy. They turn your attention from panic to presence. And presence, especially when repeated, begins to rewire how your system responds to distress. Fear expects more fear. It's used to hearing itself echoed. But when fear is met with softness, it becomes confused. It pauses. It doesn't know how to chase when there's nothing chasing with it. That pause is where the healing begins. Repeating a kind phrase may feel unnatural at first, especially if you've lived with an inner critic for a long time. If the voice in your head has been hard, sharp, perfectionistic, then softness might seem strange. But the nervous system doesn't need perfect belief. It only needs consistent practice. When you whisper a kind phrase, even without full conviction, the body begins to listen. The jaw loosens, the heart rate slows, the breath finds its rhythm again. Because you're no longer trying to outrun the feeling, you're staying with it, gently. This repetition is not about mantras for show. It's about language as a balm. The more you repeat, the more it becomes familiar. And familiarity is what the nervous system responds to. If fear has been rehearsed thousands of times, kindness needs repetition too. You're not trying to erase the anxious thought. You're adding a counterbalance. You're giving the body something new to believe. This practice becomes most effective when done before the spiral gets too fast. When you first notice the tension rising, the thought tightening, that's when you bring in the whisper. Like placing a hand on a door before it slams. You don't yell it shut. You gently close it. That's what the whisper does. It says, you don't need to go there right now. You can stay here. And here becomes a place you can return to. Sometimes the kind phrase becomes a rhythm. You say it with the breath. You walk with it. You fold laundry with it. It becomes part of your daily atmosphere. And over time, that phrase begins to settle in your deeper mind, not just the one that reacts, but the one that watches. It becomes a new default. You think a scary thought, and before panic arrives, the whisper rises. You're safe. You've been here before. You can stay. These phrases are not magic spells, but they are medicine, the kind that works through repetition, patience, and self-respect. You are teaching your inner world that kindness is not something you wait to receive from others. It's something you give, over and over, until it grows roots. And when you do, the chase slows. Not because there's no fear, but because fear no longer runs your decisions. Because fear, when met with kindness, runs out of momentum. Because kindness isn't passive. It's active. It's deliberate. It's strong enough to meet fear with stillness instead of urgency. And this strength doesn't come from willpower. It comes from gentleness. So now the practice is this. Choose one phrase. Make it yours. Repeat it not to fix the feeling, but to hold it. Say it out loud when needed. Say it in your mind when words feel too hard. Say it before sleep. Say it when you wake. Say it when silence feels too sharp and noise feels too loud. And know that every time you do, something inside you hears it, something believes it, and something begins slowly to rest. This is the whisper that ends the chase. And it starts with you. Now that you've spoken gently to fear and heard the whisper echo back as stillness instead of panic, the chase has started to fade. The loop doesn't spin as tightly. The urgency doesn't bite as hard. You've seen that fear doesn't need to be conquered. It needs to be heard in the right tone. But as the noise softens, what remains can be even more difficult to face. The feelings themselves, raw, heavy, confusing. And here's where most people turn away. Not because they can't feel, but because the moment they do, they judge it. They see sadness and call it weakness. They see anger and call it failure. They see vulnerability and call it shame. This next part of the journey asks something much deeper from you, to become the mirror that doesn't judge. Judgment is one of the mind's oldest habits. It tries to name everything: good, bad, strong, weak, right, wrong. It doesn't do this because it's cruel. It does it because it's trying to keep you safe. If the emotion is labeled as bad, maybe you'll push it away. If it's labeled as weak, maybe you'll hide it. If it's labeled as failure, maybe you'll fix it before anyone sees. But Buddhist wisdom doesn't support this model. It doesn't say emotion is dangerous. It doesn't suggest suppression. It says, observe, not to fix, to know. Observation without judgment is a radical act. It interrupts the conditioned response of labeling everything you feel as a flaw in your character. It allows the emotion to rise and fall on its own terms without being forced to fit inside a narrative of brokenness. When you become a mirror that reflects without adding commentary, you start to see emotion differently. Not as a problem, but as part of your moment-to-moment experience. It's like seeing a cloud pass across the sky. You don't ask why it's there. You just notice the shape, the color, the movement. You can do the same with your own internal weather. Sadness arises. You observe it. Not, I'm too sensitive, but this is sadness. Irritation builds. You observe it. Not, I'm a bad person, but this is irritation. Numbness lingers. You observe it. Not, what's wrong with me, but this is numbness. Every time you witness without judging, something begins to relax inside you. The shame weakens. The inner critic goes quiet. The experience becomes lighter, not because the emotion disappears, but because it's no longer tangled in resistance. This untangling changes everything. You begin to trust your emotions, not as facts, but as signals. They don't need to be erased. They need to be acknowledged. And acknowledgement without judgment is what the nervous system interprets as safety. Because judgment triggers defense. It tells the body something is wrong. But neutral observation tells the body, you're allowed to feel this. There's nothing to fight, nothing to hide. In Buddhist meditation, this is sometimes called bare attention, seeing without storytelling, feeling without explaining. And it's not an escape from emotion, it's the deepest form of presence. When you sit with yourself like this, openly, kindly, you begin to realize something strange and beautiful. That emotions don't last as long when you stop trying to control them. That sadness, when allowed to rise and fall without being called a weakness, often leaves a surprising clarity behind. That anger, when watched without fear, can burn clean and move out of the body without damaging anything. That shame, when seen without agreement, often evaporates into compassion. This does not make you detached. It makes you whole, because now you no longer reject your humanity. You welcome it. Not in a loud, performative way, but in a quiet, consistent one. You meet each emotion at the door, not with a weapon, but with a chair. You say, "Sit here, I see you," and then you let it speak, not to obey it, just to listen. This listening is an act of love. It's what allows you to stop reacting and start responding, because judgment narrows your view, but observation expands it. You go from, "I'm falling apart," to, "This is fear, this is tension, this is uncertainty." You go from, "I'm not enough," to, "This is the voice of self-doubt, it's visiting again." And in that shift, you are no longer inside the storm. You are the mirror reflecting the storm without cracking. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you choose clarity over self-punishment. It means you learn to sit with your experience long enough to understand it, instead of rushing to escape it. And in doing so, you begin to change the tone of your inner world. The mind becomes quieter, not because there's nothing to say, but because it's no longer trying to defend itself against its own reflection. You walk through life a little softer. You hold space for yourself a little wider. You stop needing to explain every feeling and begin to simply feel it. You stop trying to look strong and start learning what strength really means. And strength, here, is the courage to witness your emotions fully without collapsing into them. The mirror that doesn't judge does not mean you agree with every feeling. It means you don't shame yourself for having them. You allow sadness but you don't become sadness. You allow fear, but you don't become fear. You allow joy, even when it feels unfamiliar. You allow grief, even when it returns uninvited. And this permission, this deep, quiet permission, is what breaks the cycle of anxiety at its roots. Because anxiety feeds on judgment. It feeds on the idea that something is wrong with you for feeling what you feel. But when there's no judgment, there's nothing left to chase, nothing to hide, nothing to fix. Just you, just the moment, just the feeling, rising, falling, passing, like everything else. So now, as the next wave of emotion comes, meet it like a mirror. Say to it, I see you. Not go away, not what's wrong with me. Just, I see you. And see what happens when that's enough. You may find that the emotion doesn't need anything else from you, only that, only your presence. And that presence, held without judgment, becomes the beginning of peace. Now that you've learned how to sit with your emotions like a mirror, reflecting, not reacting, you've taken one of the most powerful steps in freeing yourself from inner resistance. You've stopped calling sadness a flaw. You've stopped naming fear as failure. And in doing so, the mind has started to loosen its grip. But even with that clarity, one tricky habit still lingers: thought itself. Not just the emotion attached to the thought, but the constant stories the mind spins, each one feeling urgent, each one demanding belief. This is where your next shift begins, the understanding that a thought is not a fire. It doesn't need to be fed. Anxious thinking is like striking a match. One spark, an intrusive idea, a doubtful question, a vague worry, lights up in your mind. And without realizing it, you start to fan it. You analyze, you explain, you debate, you imagine outcomes, you rehearse conversations, you jump from one what-if to the next, thinking that if you can just keep talking to the fire, it will burn out. But fires don't go out because you speak to them. They go out because you stop adding fuel. That fuel is internal storytelling. It's the words you add to the original thought in hopes of solving it. But anxious thoughts are not puzzles. They're habits. They don't need answers. They need space. This is the part where you begin to see your thoughts not as commands, but as events. They rise, they pass, they repeat. But they aren't urgent, and they aren't you. In Buddhist psychology, thoughts are known as mental formations, temporary, conditioned events in the mind, not facts, not enemies, just weather, just sound, just motion. The problem isn't that anxious thoughts appear. That's natural. The problem is that you keep trying to explain them away. You keep writing entire stories around a single sentence. A thought arises. What if something goes wrong? And instead of letting it fade, you begin to script. You add detail. You create dialogue. You visualize endings. You believe the thought has momentum, but it's your attention that gives it motion. This is why one of the deepest practices is to stop talking to the thought. Not to suppress it, not to avoid it, but to stop fueling it. Because a thought, left alone, has no energy. It's like a match that never touches wood. It flares briefly, then fades. But your habit may still be to chase it, especially if you were raised to solve problems quickly, especially if you were taught that worry shows responsibility, especially if anxiety once felt like protection. But now you're beginning to see the cost of this habit. Every time you build a story around fear, you give it shape, you give it heat, you give it time. And then it feels real. It feels bigger. It starts to feel like you, but it's not you. It's a narrative you constructed inside the mind, and you can step away from it at any time. How? By noticing the story's beginning. That's the key. It always starts with one thought, something small, a whisper, and if you catch it there, if you say inwardly, "This is just a thought," you've already broken the pattern. You've shifted from being inside the thought to witnessing it. That shift, subtle as it is the whole practice. You don't argue with the thought. You don't replace it. You don't try to make it prettier. You just stop building a world around it. You let the thought be incomplete. You let it hang in the air like an unanswered question. And then you turn your attention to something real, to the breath, to the floor, to the sensation of your hands, not as distraction, as anchoring. Because while the story lives in your head, the body lives in the now. And the now doesn't need a narrative. The now just needs presence. Over time, this practice rewires your entire response to fear. You begin to recognize your patterns faster. You hear the mind trying to build a story, and you stop mid-sentence. You breathe, you return, and something inside you sighs with relief. Not because you found the answer, but because you stopped looking for one. That's when the thought fizzles out. That's when the fire dies. Not because you fought it, but because you stopped feeding it. And this doesn't mean you never think. It means you think less reactively. You think with awareness. You think with choice. You stop letting every idea carry you into its own world. And you start staying grounded in this one. You'll still have thoughts. You're human. You'll still worry sometimes. That's okay. But now you know what to do. You see the thought rise. You pause. You name it gently. A thought. You let it be. You return to the breath. You return to your base. And the thought loses its grip. This is not detachment. This is freedom. You're not suppressing anything. You're refusing to be ruled by imagination. You're learning how to be with fear without becoming its author. This is how you become steady. This is how you stop being set on fire by every spark in the mind. You become the one who watches the flame, not the one who keeps lighting it. And in that space, you begin to rest, because the story is quiet, because the match never caught, because you chose stillness instead of smoke. And now you know you can do that again, anytime, every time. Now that you've learned not to feed the fire, that thoughts only burn when you build around them, you've stepped out of the habit of turning every worry into a story. The need to explain, to fix, to finish has started to ease. You've stopped letting every passing fear demand a response. But even with that space, something harder to sit with often lingers. Not the flame of panic, but the fog of not knowing. The gap between clarity and confusion. The blank spaces your mind wants to fill. And this is where the next shift happens, not by solving the unknown, but by learning how to rest inside it. This is where you uncover the calm hidden in questions. An anxious mind wants answers. It wants closure, facts, guarantees. It wants a plan, a solution, a sign. And the moment it encounters uncertainty, it rushes. It clutches, it searches, because it's been trained to believe that unknown equals danger, that until the question is answered, there can be no peace. But Buddhism offers another way. It doesn't ask you to force certainty. It invites you to sit with the question itself, to lean gently into the mystery rather than fighting your way out of it. Not because you shouldn't care, but because your care will carry more clarity when it comes from stillness rather than panic. A question by itself is not a threat. It's a doorway, and when held with curiosity instead of fear, it becomes a place to breathe. But this takes practice. Most people meet uncertainty with tension. The shoulders tighten, the chest constricts, the thoughts loop. What if this doesn't work? What if I made the wrong decision? What if something goes wrong tomorrow, next week, next year? And those what-ifs feel endless. But here's the thing. Every what-if is based on a future that doesn't yet exist. And when you build around it, when you scramble to resolve a question that has no answer, you pull yourself out of now. But when you pause, when you stop trying to force certainty, something else reveals itself. A kind of quiet. Not because the question is answered, but because you're no longer chasing the answer. You begin to learn that presence isn't about knowing, it's about staying. Staying with the discomfort of not knowing, staying with the open sentence, staying with the breath even when the mind wants to sprint ahead. That is where calm begins to grow, not in the conclusion, but in the space between the words. This shift is subtle. You might still hear the question rise. What if I fail? What if I'm not enough? What if this doesn't end well? And instead of answering, you meet the question with a breath. You say inwardly, yes, that question is here. And then you stay. You stay without forcing an outcome, without building a story, without pretending to know. You let the question breathe. And this isn't passivity, it's trust. Trust that not all answers arrive when you demand them. Trust that some questions soften over time, not through force, but through presence. Trust that you don't need to solve your life like a puzzle to be worthy of rest. This is where most anxious habits start to lose their power, because they depend on urgency. But when you slow down, when you start to treat questions as companions instead of enemies, the urgency fades. You begin to see the space between thought and reaction. And in that space, you start living differently. You no longer rush into decisions just to escape the discomfort of uncertainty. You no longer demand guarantees before you let yourself feel peace. You begin to build your inner world on something sturdier than answers. You build it on attention, on patience, on your capacity to stay open even when clarity hasn't arrived. And here's the paradox. The more you relax into the question, the more wisdom begins to speak, not loudly, not quickly, but in small, grounded ways. A choice that feels gentle instead of forced. An instinct that arises from the body instead of the mind. A moment of quiet understanding that wasn't there before. This kind of knowing doesn't come from force. It comes from silence. That's the calm hidden in questions. It's not the calm of having everything figured out. It's the calm of no longer needing to figure it all out immediately. It's the calm of knowing you can still be okay without perfect knowledge. That you can live inside the question and still find beauty, still make progress, still breathe fully. Because questions, when held kindly, become teachers. They ask you to slow down, to listen, to trust what's unfolding, to let go of the idea that life must be tied up with a bow for it to have value. you start to see that certainty was never the goal. Presence was. And presence, unlike certainty, doesn't depend on outcome. It depends on how you meet the moment. So, let the questions come. Let them rise. Let them sit beside you like wind in the trees. And instead of reaching for an answer, reach for your breath. Return to the exhale. Return to your feet. Return to the part of you that knows how to wait without fear. That part of you is still there. It always was. It's the part that knows you are still whole even when the story is incomplete. And now, in the silence that follows the latest unanswerable question, you begin to feel something new. Not panic, not urgency, but calm. Still there, still waiting, still yours. Now that you've learned to lean into questions, to sit inside uncertainty without rushing for answers, you've discovered that calm doesn't always follow clarity. Sometimes it arrives when you stop chasing clarity altogether. That pause, that willingness to wait without panic, already signals a deeper shift inside your nervous system. But even as the mind becomes quieter, the body often holds on. The chest tightens subtly. The breath stays shallow. The tension lingers under the surface like something half-lived, something unfinished. This is where the next layer of peace lives, not in thought, but in breath, not in what comes in, but in what you finally let go of. This is the exhale that waited to happen. Most people think of breath only in terms of inhalation, getting enough air, drawing energy in, preparing to move forward. But in many Buddhist and somatic practices, the true medicine lives in the exhale. Because while the inhale activates, the exhale releases. The inhale stirs the body awake. The exhale softens it back into safety. And for many who live with anxiety, the breath never quite completes. It cuts short. It ends early. The body is always slightly braced, holding just a little too much without knowing how to let go. This incomplete breath is a quiet signal. It tells the nervous system that something isn't done, that the body still expects more danger, that rest isn't fully permitted yet. It's not loud, but it shapes everything. It's why sleep feels shallow, why shoulders stay tense, why even when nothing is wrong, something still feels unfinished. The long, conscious exhale changes this, not by force, but by rhythm. It's not dramatic. It's not about control. It's about giving the body time to do what it already knows how to do. Release. And release isn't just physical. It's emotional. It's mental. It's cellular. The exhale tells your whole system, it's safe to let go now. But to find this, you have to stop rushing the breath. You have to become willing to sit with it, not as a technique to achieve calm, but as an invitation to return to what's already yours. Try it. Without changing anything, just notice your next exhale. Don't push it. Don't lengthen it yet. Just feel it as it happens. The downward movement, the softening, the surrender. Now, let the next exhale be just a little longer. Let it fall rather than be forced. Let it leave without pulling it back. Let it carry out not just air, but the weight your body has been holding. The more you practice this, the more you begin to notice what lives in the out-breath. There's grief there sometimes, relief, unspoken tiredness. There's history, uncried tears, words you never said. And it doesn't all need to come out at once. It just needs space. Space to leave the body gently, one breath at a time. Long exhalations activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of your body that restores, rebuilds, and rests. In moments of fear, it's this breath that turns off the alarm, and it's often the last thing people remember to do when they're afraid. The inhale comes fast, shallow, high in the chest. The exhale never quite finishes, so you stay braced, even when you think you're calm. But now you're learning that calm isn't always stillness. Sometimes it's completion, and nothing completes a moment like the full release of breath. In Buddhist walking meditation, each step is paired with the breath. The body syncs with the rhythm of inhale and exhale. But over time, the practice emphasizes the exhale, because it's in the exhale that tension falls away, in the exhale that stillness deepens, in the exhale that awareness expands. You can build this into your day in the smallest ways. When you close a door, exhale slowly. When you sit down, exhale as you arrive. When you turn off the light, let go with the breath. It's not about dramatic breathing exercises. It's about reclaiming the breath that's already waiting for you. The breath that says, you don't need to carry this anymore. This breath doesn't rush. It doesn't perform. It doesn't force quiet. It allows quiet to emerge. And the more you trust it, the more you begin to feel different. Not because the world outside changed, but because your body finally has permission to stop gripping the inside. You begin to feel space around your heart, length in your spine, weight in your feet. Your body starts believing what your thoughts are only beginning to accept, that peace isn't earned by solving everything. It's received by letting go. And letting go begins with the exhale. So now the practice becomes simple. You notice when your breath is short. You feel when your body is tight, and you let one breath go long, then another, and maybe another, until the rhythm feels natural again. You'll know you're doing it right when you start to feel heavy, not with sadness, but with rest. You'll know when your eyes soften, when your thoughts slow down without being forced to, when your inner voice gets quiet, not because you silenced it, but because it no longer needs to shout. That's the exhale doing its work. And with time, the exhale becomes not just a tool, but a home, a place to return to, a way to end the moment without having to escape it. You may still have fear, you may still have questions, but now you have a way to meet them, not with resistance, but with breath, not with panic, but with release. The exhale is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself, but it changes everything. Because now, when anxiety rises, you don't rise with it. You exhale. And in that exhale, something long held finally lets go. And that letting go was what your body has been waiting for all along. After walking through each of these teachings, slowly, gently, one breath at a time, you've now traveled a path most people spend their whole lives running from. Not the path of escaping anxiety, but the path of meeting it. You've learned that anxious thoughts don't need to be solved, they need to be seen without fuel. That emotion isn't weakness, it's movement. That silence isn't empty, it's healing. And that the breath, especially the exhale, is not just an act of survival, but a return to peace. You didn't conquer anxiety, you unhooked from it. You stopped needing closure. You remembered that stillness lives in the body, not the future. And most importantly, you no longer need to fight your way to calm. You've learned to listen, to stay, to soften. So tonight, as sleep begins to take you, there is no need to resist or rehearse or hold anything tighter. The teachings are already working inside you. Every pause, every breath, every whisper of awareness is undoing what fear tried to build. Let your body rest. Let your thoughts pass. Let yourself be held by what doesn't need fixing. If these teachings have brought you even one moment of quiet, one deeper breath, one softened edge inside a restless night, leave a comment below with the words, "I am learning to release." Your voice might be the one someone else needs to read. And if this journey brought you peace, support the path ahead by subscribing and clicking the bell. More moments like this are waiting for you. Until next time, breathe gently and let it go.